Have you ever felt like you're living, yet not fully awake? Days repeat, conversations blur. You nod, you agree, you decide. But deep inside, you know something else is steering you. This video isn't just about revealing who influences your mind. It's about handing you the key to take your power back. Tonight, you stop being moved by the world and start moving it. Take a slow breath. Let go of the noise. Your awakening begins now. Picture yourself in conversation with a stranger. They lean in, place a light hand on your arm, and ask for something small. Before you realize it, you're nodding in agreement. The gesture is fleeting, almost invisible, yet it shifts the way you respond. You obey people who touch you first. Why does something as simple as touch carry so much power? Psychologists have studied this curious effect for decades. In one classic experiment, researchers asked people on the street to fill out a short survey. When the request was made without contact, compliance was modest. But when the researcher gently touched the participant on the elbow for just a second, agreement rates soared. The difference wasn't in the words, but in the touch, a signal that triggered trust, attention, and subtle obligation. Waiters who brush a customer's shoulder receive bigger tips. Teachers who pat a student on the back are seen as warmer and more supportive. Even in politics, handshakes linger longer than necessary because the physical connection creates the illusion of sincerity. Touch works beneath awareness, activating instincts that evolved when physical closeness meant safety, belonging, and cooperation. But this influence isn't limited to generosity. A hand on your back can steer you through a doorway without resistance. A fleeting tap can frame a request as friendly rather than intrusive. It blurs the line between choice and compliance, leaving you with the impression that you freely agreed when your body had already decided. The mechanism is ancient. Long before language existed, our ancestors relied on physical proximity to signal trust. A touch meant you were close enough to harm, but chose not to. That split-second calculation still happens in your nervous system today, beneath conscious thought. When someone touches you first, your body reads it as a gesture of openness, and your mind follows with a small, almost imperceptible lowering of defenses. So next time someone touches you lightly before asking for something, ask yourself this: would you have said yes if they hadn't? And then remember, the first to touch doesn't just get your attention, they often get your obedience, too. The hand that reaches first often holds the most power, not through force, but through the ancient language of skin against skin. But touch isn't the only way to bend someone's will. Sometimes, the key to getting what you want is asking for something you know you'll never receive. Start with a ridiculous ask, then go small. Imagine a friend asking if you'd lend them $1,000. You almost laugh, certain the request is impossible. But then, almost as if conceding, they add, well, maybe just $10? Suddenly, the smaller request doesn't feel so out of reach. Something inside you shifts. This is the curious effect known as the door-in-the-face technique. In the 1970s, psychologists tested this on unsuspecting strangers. The first group was asked to volunteer 2 full years, mentoring troubled youth. Nearly all of them refused. Then came the second request. Could they at least spend a couple of hours chaperoning children to the zoo? Agreement rates jumped dramatically. By presenting the impossible first, The reasonable option became not just acceptable, but inviting. Salespeople use this tactic constantly. A car dealer shows you the fully loaded luxury model first. Leather seats, premium sound system, every upgrade imaginable, before presenting the modest sedan. The sedan suddenly looks reasonable, even cheap by comparison. Charities ask for large donations before suggesting a smaller recurring gift. Even in everyday life, children instinctively deploy it, asking for dessert before dinner, so that settling for one cookie afterward feels like compromise. It works because our minds are wired for contrast and reciprocity. Saying no to something extreme makes us feel compelled to say yes when the request is scaled down. It's as though we owe balance to the person who dared to ask too much. The first no creates a psychological debt, a feeling that we've been difficult, unreasonable. The second request offers redemption, a chance to prove we're cooperative after all. The beauty of this technique is its invisibility. The person saying yes rarely realizes they've been guided. They believe the second request simply made more sense, never noticing that the first request was designed to fail. It was never the goal. It was the setup, the stage that made the real request look reasonable by comparison. So next time someone presents you with a request that suddenly feels reasonable, ask yourself, would you have agreed if it hadn't been preceded by something outrageous? Remember, the first no isn't the real goal. It's the setup for the yes that follows. The door slammed in the face is just theatre. The real door was always the second one, standing open and waiting. And once you've gotten someone to say yes, there's another way to make them reveal even more than they intended. Silence makes people spill secrets. Imagine sitting across from someone in conversation. You ask them a question, and instead of filling the air with words, you say nothing. The pause stretches longer than feels comfortable. Their eyes flicker, their hands fidget, and almost without realizing it, they begin to talk again, offering more than they ever intended. This is the quiet power of silence. Psychologists call it the uncomfortable pause, and it works because silence disrupts our natural rhythm of speech. Most people feel uneasy when a gap lingers in conversation. The urge to restore balance drives them to fill the void, often by revealing details they had no plan to share. The silence becomes a vacuum, and nature, including human nature, abhors a vacuum. Negotiators use this instinct to their advantage. After a proposal is made, they remain still. They don't nod, don't speak, don't even shift in their chair. The silence grows heavy, pressing down on the room like a physical weight. The other side, desperate to ease the tension, often concedes more than they needed to. They'll lower their price, add conditions, reveal information, anything to make the silence stop. Salespeople rely on it. 2. A customer hesitates over a purchase, and instead of jumping in with more persuasion, the seller says nothing. The silence itself pushes the buyer toward a decision. It's not aggressive, not pushy. It's simply the absence of noise. And in that absence, the customer's own thoughts become louder, often talking themselves into the purchase the seller never had to sell. Even in personal conversations, silence has a way of drawing out truths. Small confessions surface, hidden feelings emerge, unfinished thoughts complete themselves simply because the quiet feels unbearable. A friend shares a problem. You listen, and instead of rushing to offer advice, you wait. In that waiting, they often discover their own answer, speaking it aloud as though you'd guided them there, when all you did was nothing. But the most striking part is how invisible this influence is. Few people walk away, realizing that their words were shaped not by persuasion, but by the absence of it. They don't feel manipulated. They feel heard, understood, as though the conversation gave them space to think. The best listeners aren't the ones who nod and affirm constantly. They're the ones who give you space, who wait, who let the silence do the work. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. And when you say nothing, people will tell you everything, filling the silence with secrets they never meant to share, simply because the quiet demanded to be filled. Of course, silence alone won't always be enough. Sometimes you need to make people feel like they're looking in a mirror, like you understand them so deeply that you've become their reflection. Mirror their body. They'll trust you instantly. You cross your arms. A moment later, the person across from you does the same. You lean forward, and they lean too, as though your movements have set the rhythm of the exchange. This is no accident. It's mirroring, one of the most subtle ways we signal connection without ever speaking a word. Researchers have found that people open up more when they see their posture, tone, or gestures quietly reflected back. A waiter who repeats a customer's order word for word gets larger tips than one who paraphrases. Negotiators who mirrored their counterparts were far more likely to reach agreement. It isn't imitation, it's resonance, a way of saying without words, "I'm with you. I understand. We're the same." Mirroring works because it taps into something older than language, something wired into our biology millions of years before we ever spoke. Our ancestors survived in tribes where similarity meant safety. When someone reflects our movements, our nervous system reads it as belonging. We feel understood, accepted, even if no real understanding is truly there. But this instinct can be guided, shaped, used. A skilled communicator will tilt their head just after you do, match your pace of speech, or breathe in time with your pauses. You don't notice it consciously. Yet you walk away with a sense of closeness that feels real, that feels earned through genuine connection. But was it? Or was it simply the reflection of yourself you saw in their movements? The technique extends beyond body language. Mirroring works with words, with tone, with energy. If someone speaks softly, speaking softly back creates harmony. If they're animated, matching that animation makes them feel seen. Even emotional mirroring works. Reflecting someone's frustration or excitement validates their experience, making them trust you more deeply. That's the quiet power of mirroring. It builds bridges where none existed. It lowers defenses without a word. It creates the illusion, or perhaps the reality, of understanding. So when you want someone to trust you, try listening with more than your ears. Match their rhythm, their pauses, their presence. Watch how quickly walls crumble when they feel like they're sitting across not from a stranger, but from a reflection, a mirror that shows them who they are and silently agrees with everything it sees. But what if you need to refuse someone without losing their warmth, without breaking the connection you've built? Here's where things get truly strange, where rejection becomes acceptance. Reject someone while smiling, they'll say yes. You've probably had this happen before. Someone turns you down, but they do it with a smile so warm that you almost feel like you got what you wanted anyway. Instead of feeling rejected, you find yourself leaning closer, strangely willing to agree with them, to accept their refusal as though it were a gift. That's the trick hidden in a simple grin. Psychologists have found that rejection wrapped in friendliness lands differently in the brain. When someone hears no delivered flatly, with a neutral or negative expression, it feels like a door closing. The words register as rejection, and rejection triggers the same pain centers in the brain as physical injury. But when it's paired with warmth, a smile, a soft tone, maybe a slight touch on the arm, the no doesn't feel like the end of the conversation. It feels like an invitation to stay connected. Picture yourself saying no to a request at work. Instead of frowning or looking uncomfortable, you tilt your head slightly. Let a small smile curve your mouth and soften your words with warmth. I'd love to help, but I can't right now. The strange thing is, the other person often nods as if they've just agreed with you, not been turned away. They walk away feeling okay about the rejection, sometimes even grateful for your honesty. It happens in dating, too. A refusal given with charm doesn't end the interaction. Sometimes it deepens it. The person rejected feels confused. They were told no, but the delivery felt like yes. That confusion keeps them engaged, keeps them thinking about you, keeps them coming back because the rejection didn't hurt the way rejections usually do. It works because we read faces faster than we process words. Long before the meaning of a sentence reaches the conscious mind, the expression has already told us how to feel about it. A smile says safety, rapport, even agreement. It triggers mirror neurons, making us want to smile back, making us feel good. So when the word no arrives a second later, the contradiction doesn't register as conflict. It registers as connection. The smile has already told our nervous system that everything is okay, that we're still liked, still valued. So when you think of rejection, notice how rarely it's the word alone that shapes the outcome. Sometimes the smallest curve of your lips carries more influence than the decision itself. A no, delivered with warmth, can build more trust than a reluctant yes ever could. And if a smile can soften rejection, imagine what repeating someone's name can do when you want them drawn closer, when you want to plant yourself in their memory. Say their name enough and they'll like you. There's a word that makes people smile, lean in, and feel seen. It's not please. It's not thank you. It's their own name. You say it once. They notice. You say it again. They remember. Say it a few more times, softly, naturally, and suddenly they like you. Maybe more than they should. Maybe more than makes logical sense. Because hearing your own name lights up the brain in the same places that respond to reward, to praise, to love. It feels personal, as though someone reached through the noise and picked you out of the crowd. In a world where most interactions feel generic, transactional, forgettable, hearing your name creates a moment of recognition. You're not just another face. You're you. And someone noticed. A store clerk who says, "Thanks, Sarah," instead of just "thanks," leaves a warmer impression. The customer walks away feeling seen, feeling like the interaction mattered. A teacher who says, "You did great today, Jason," anchors that feeling long after class ends. The praise matters, yes, but the name makes it stick. It transforms generic encouragement into something personal, something that Jason will remember weeks later. Even a stranger who learns your name and uses it a few times suddenly feels familiar, safe, like someone you've known longer than you have. It creates false intimacy, a shortcut to connection that bypasses the usual slow building of trust. Within minutes, the stranger feels like a friend, simply because they've called you by name. The secret is timing and frequency. Overdo it, and people pull back. Use someone's name in every sentence, and it starts to sound like a sales technique, manipulative and transparent. But use it sparingly, sincerely, at the beginning of a conversation, once in the middle when making a point, and again at the end when saying goodbye, and it becomes a shortcut to trust. Salespeople, leaders, and even manipulators know this. They're not just capturing attention, they're planting connection. Dale Carnegie wrote about it decades ago in How to Win Friends and Influence People. A person's name is, to that person, the sweetest sound in any language. It's not new psychology, it's ancient. But it works because it taps into something fundamental, the human need to be recognized, to matter, to be more than anonymous. Politicians use it when they can, remembering names in crowds, making individuals feel chosen. Cult leaders use it to create bonds with followers. Even in everyday manipulation, someone who remembers and uses your name feels more trustworthy, more genuine, more worthy of your time and loyalty. So if you want someone to remember you, like you, maybe even choose you over others, don't talk louder. Don't try harder with elaborate compliments or grand gestures. Just say their name and mean it. Because in a world where most people feel invisible, being called by name is a kind of magic. And the person who gives you that magic becomes someone you want to stay close to. But here's something most people get wrong when they're trying to sound intelligent, trying to establish expertise or authority. They think sounding smart means sounding certain. The truth is far more subtle, far more counterintuitive. Uncertainty makes you sound smarter. Think about how people usually speak when they want to sound intelligent. Bold words, firm answers, absolute certainty. This will work. I know this is right. There's no question about it. But strangely, confidence doesn't always convince. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes absolute certainty makes people suspicious, makes them wonder what you're hiding, what you're not saying. In studies of persuasion, scientists found that when experts admitted small uncertainties, saying, "It's likely," or "We're still testing," or "The evidence suggests," though more research would help, people trusted them more than when they claimed complete certainty. Why? Because certainty feels staged. It feels like a sales pitch, like someone trying too hard to convince you. Real knowledge, deep knowledge, leaves space for doubt. You've probably felt it yourself. A friend swears a movie is amazing, the best thing they've ever seen, absolutely perfect. And you roll your eyes. The overselling makes you suspicious. But if they say, "You might like it, it's a little weird, but I enjoyed it," you lean in. Their honesty makes you curious. The admission of uncertainty feels authentic, and authenticity creates trust. Or in a job interview, imagine two candidates. One says, I can definitely handle this role. I know exactly what needs to be done. The other says, I don't know everything, but here's what I've learned so far, and here's how I'd approach learning the rest. Which one sounds more capable? Often, it's the second. The first sounds arrogant, potentially delusional. The second sounds thoughtful, self-aware, genuinely intelligent. The trick works because our brains equate a touch of uncertainty with authenticity. Overconfidence feels fake, feels like bluster covering incompetence. A small pause, a quiet, I could be wrong, signals care, humility, and truth. It suggests you've actually thought about the problem, considered alternatives, weighed evidence. It makes your certainties, when you do express them, carry more weight because they're clearly not reflexive, and the mind rewards it with trust. We don't trust people who seem to have an answer for everything. We trust people who admit when they don't. We respect the scientist who says, we don't know yet, more than the one who invents answers. We follow leaders who acknowledge complexity rather than promising simple solutions. That's the hidden irony. People don't follow those who act like they know everything. They follow the ones who admit they don't. So if you want your words to carry more weight, don't wrap them in absolute certainty. Let a little doubt through. Hedge appropriately. Say, I think, instead of I know, when it's honest. Because in a world full of loud voices claiming to be right, the quiet, maybe, often sounds the most like truth. And truth, even uncertain truth, is what people are desperately searching for. Of course, sometimes the goal isn't to inform or persuade through uncertainty. It's to guide someone toward a decision while making them feel free. And one of the most elegant ways to do that is by removing the real question entirely. Give them a choice, then get your way. Do you want to do this now or later? At first, it sounds like freedom, a choice laid in front of you, open and fair. Two options, both reasonable, the decision yours to make. But look closer. Both roads lead to the same place. That's the trick. You weren't asked if you'd do it, only when. The real question, whether you do it at all, was never on the table. Psychologists call this the illusion of choice. We resist being forced. We push back when someone says, do this. The word no rises immediately in our throat. But when it feels like we've chosen, the tension melts. We go along willingly, even proudly, as though the decision was ours all along. And in a sense, it was. You did choose. You just chose from options someone else selected. Parents know this well. Do you want to brush your teeth before the story or after? The child picks, feeling empowered, autonomous, respected. But either way, the teeth get brushed. The parent never asked if toothbrushing was optional. They simply framed the timing as the variable, and the child, focused on that choice, never questioned the underlying requirement. Salespeople use it constantly. Would you like the blue one or the black one? The yes or no moment is skipped entirely. The question isn't, do you want to buy? But, which one do you want to buy? The answer becomes, which one? Not whether. And most people, caught in the frame of the question, answer the question asked rather than the question that should have been asked. Even in difficult conversations, this pattern holds. Do you want to talk now or after dinner? Feels gentler, more respectful than we need to talk. The outcome doesn't change. The conversation will happen, but the path feels lighter, feels collaborative. The person being asked feels they have control over at least one variable, and that small sense of control makes compliance easier. And that's the secret. Control doesn't always come from limiting options. It comes from shaping them, from choosing which options appear on the menu. If you ever need someone to walk where you want them to, don't shove them down a single path. That triggers resistance, rebellion, the human instinct to assert autonomy. Offer 2 doors instead. Both open to the same room, but they'll thank you for letting them choose which handle to turn. The illusion of choice is powerful because it's not entirely an illusion. They did choose. They just chose within boundaries you drew, and those boundaries were invisible. And while you're guiding their choices, there's one more trick that makes everything you say land heavier, that adds weight to your words before they've even left your mouth. Pause before answering to seem more intelligent. Someone asks you a question. The room turns toward you, waiting. You know the answer instantly. It's on the tip of your tongue, ready to spill out. But instead of speaking, you hold it back. 1 second, 2. The silence stretches, and something shifts in the room. The silence frames your response before you've spoken a word, and before you've even answered. People have already decided. You must be thoughtful, careful, intelligent. Psychologists call this the power of the pause. When we answer too quickly, we risk sounding eager, nervous, or rehearsed, like we've been waiting for this question, like we're desperate to show what we know. But when we delay, even slightly, it suggests that we're weighing our words, that we value precision more than speed, that we're considering nuance before committing to an answer. Experiments back this up convincingly. In one study, people who paused before answering were rated as more credible than those who spoke immediately, even when the answers themselves were identical. Word for word, the same response. But the delay created the impression of depth. The mind fills in the gap. If they're taking time, they must be thinking. If they're thinking, they must know more than they're saying. If they know more than they're saying, they must be truly intelligent. It works in everyday life across countless situations. In job interviews, pausing before responding to tough questions makes your words land heavier, makes the interviewer lean in, convinced they're about to hear something worthwhile. In arguments, a pause keeps you from reacting emotionally. It gives you time to choose words that persuade rather than escalate. And it forces the other person to sit with their own words, to hear them echo in the silence. Even in casual conversation, that brief silence draws others closer. They wait for what comes next. They give you their full attention because the pause has created anticipation. It's a tiny moment of theatre, and everyone in the conversation becomes an audience, waiting for the curtain to rise. We often fear silence in conversation. We rush to fill it, worried that pauses make us look slow or uncertain. But silence is weight. It slows time. It shapes perception. It tells the world that what follows matters, that your words are valuable enough to require a moment of consideration before release. So the next time you feel the urge to answer instantly, try waiting. Let the quiet do the work. Count to 2 in your head. Let the question hang in the air for just a moment longer than feels natural. Because sometimes the smartest words you'll ever say are the ones that arrive just a heartbeat late. preceded by a silence that makes everyone in the room believe you're about to say something profound. But pausing isn't the only way to make people notice you, to make them feel something deeper than surface-level appreciation. There's also what you choose to notice about them and how you frame that observation. Compliment their taste, not them. You see someone wearing a new shirt. You say, "That's a nice shirt." They nod, smile politely, and move on. It's a compliment, sure, but a forgettable one. The words land and disappear like rain on pavement. Now try a different version. "You've got great taste in clothes." Suddenly, it feels different. The air between you shifts. It's no longer about the fabric. It's about them, about who they are, about the choices they make. Psychologists have found that people respond far more strongly to compliments that reflect judgment rather than appearance or possession. Saying, "I like your house," flatters the object. The house is nice, and you've noticed. But saying, "You've got an amazing eye for design," flatters the person who chose it, who arranged it, who made 1,000 small decisions that resulted in the space you're standing in. One fades quickly, forgotten by the next conversation. The other sticks, burrows into memory, becomes part of how that person sees themselves. This is because we crave recognition, not just for what we own, but for the choices we make. Our possessions are accidents of circumstance, gifts, inheritances, things we bought because they were available. But our taste, that's us. That's the invisible part of ourselves made visible through curation, through selection, through the 1,000 tiny decisions that express who we are without words. Complimenting someone's taste acknowledges their mind, their judgment, their discernment. It says, "I see not just the thing, but the person who chose the thing." And that recognition goes deep. In studies of praise, people consistently reported feeling more connected and more valued when the compliment reflected personality over possessions. The compliment became personal, intimate even, because it acknowledged something internal rather than external. Think about it carefully. A stranger says, "Cool watch." You'll forget it in minutes. It's about the object, and objects are replaceable, forgettable. But if they say, "You've got a great eye for watches," it suggests something deeper. You have style, you have judgment, you know things. You made a choice that someone else recognized as good. That reflection lingers in your mind long after the stranger has walked away. But here's the subtlety, the line between genuine compliment and transparent manipulation. Forced compliments feel hollow, even manipulative. People sense when you're trying too hard, when you're complimenting their taste on something you don't actually care about or understand. The key is noticing something real, something that genuinely caught your attention, then framing it around their choices rather than the object itself. So if you want to make someone feel warm, connected, maybe even loyal to you, skip the shallow praise about what they have. Look deeper. Compliment the judgment behind the choice, not the choice itself. Because when you recognize someone's taste, you don't just make them feel good about what they own. You make them feel good about themselves. And more importantly, you make them feel good about you, for being the kind of person who notices, who sees, who understands that the things we choose say something about who we are. And speaking of presence and influence, there's a placement trick that shifts behavior without a single word. without any direct interaction at all. Stand behind them, and they behave better. You walk into a room and see two people talking. One faces you, making eye contact, aware of your presence. The other has their back turned, unaware you've entered. Which one do you think is more careful with their words? It's the one who can't see you, but knows you're there. That's the quiet effect of presence, especially when it's positioned behind someone. Psychologists have studied this in surprising ways. In an office experiment, snacks were left on a table for employees to take freely. When no one was around, people took more, sometimes handfuls, more than they needed. But when a simple poster of eyes was placed above the table, just eyes, nothing else, not even a face, the amount people took dropped sharply. They weren't actually being watched. They only felt like they were. And that feeling alone changed behavior. Your nervous system is built to notice what's behind you. It's evolutionary. Predators attacked from behind. Threats came from blind spots. Even if you don't turn around, even if you seem focused on the task in front of you, a part of you stays alert, monitoring the space you can't see. The posture changes. The voice softens. The choices become more careful. It's not fear. Exactly. It's awareness. The sense that an unseen audience is close enough to matter. You can use this in subtle ways. Standing just behind someone at a computer, not hovering, not breathing down their neck, just present in their peripheral awareness. They'll work differently, more carefully. They'll double-check their work. Think twice before cutting corners. Behave as though someone might be watching, even if you're looking at your phone. Sitting one row back during a meeting has the same effect. The person in front of you doesn't see your face, doesn't know if you're paying attention or judging them. And that uncertainty makes them more careful with their words. Hovering quietly near a conversation without joining it. The simple fact that you are there changes the dynamic, makes people edit themselves, makes them act as though the invisible weight of judgment has settled on their shoulders. It works in classrooms too. Teachers who move to the back of the room during independent work often find students more focused than when the teacher stands at the front. At the front, students can see the teacher, can gauge whether they're being watched. At the back, they can't. Every student feels potentially observed, and behavior improves across the board. So if you want someone to be sharper, kinder, more controlled, more careful with their work or their words, you don't always need to call them out. You don't need to supervise directly or give instructions. You just need to be there, just behind them. A presence they can sense, but not see, letting the awareness of your proximity do the work. Because sometimes the most powerful supervision is the kind that never announces itself, that simply exists as a possibility in someone's blind spot. But presence alone won't always guide behavior toward agreement. Sometimes you need to plant a rhythm in someone's mind before they realize they're following it, to create harmony before asking for consensus. Nod while talking. They'll agree without noticing. Try this the next time you're explaining something, the next time you need someone to agree with you. As you speak, let your head dip gently in a nod. Not fast, not exaggerated, just a natural rhythm, as if your body already agrees with the words coming out of your mouth. Watch what happens. The person across from you will almost always start to nod back. and once their head is moving, their mind often follows. This isn't just guesswork or folk wisdom. Studies on non-verbal communication show that people are more likely to agree when they're exposed to nodding cues. In one experiment, participants who saw nodding images while reading messages rated those messages as more persuasive than those who saw neutral faces. The content was identical. The difference was the nodding. The body responds before the brain does. We mimic without thinking, and then justify it after. You've seen it happen in conversations, probably without realizing it was happening. Someone tells a story, nodding along as they speak, and before you realize it, you're nodding too, even if you hadn't planned to, even if you're not sure you agree. That small movement creates a sense of harmony, of synchronization. Agreement feels easier than resistance. Going along with the nod feels more natural than stopping to disagree. The power of this trick is that it's invisible. No one walks away saying, "I agreed with them," because they nodded. They simply feel like the conversation flowed, like their thoughts aligned with yours naturally. Its influence hidden in plain sight, operating through the body rather than through logic or argument. You can see it in skilled public speakers. They nod when making key points, and the audience nods back, creating a wave of visual agreement that reinforces the message. You can see it in sales, where a salesperson nods while describing benefits, and the customer finds themselves nodding along, their body agreeing before their mind has fully processed the pitch. Even in negotiations, nodding can shift dynamics. When you nod while the other party speaks, you're not necessarily agreeing with their position. You're simply acknowledging that you're listening, that you understand. But that nodding creates rapport, makes them feel heard, and when it's your turn to speak, they're more likely to nod back, to mirror the gesture you showed them. So the next time you want someone to lean toward your side, don't just craft the perfect sentence or marshal the best arguments. Let your body add the punctuation. A subtle nod timed with your words can do more than logic ever could. Because once their head starts moving, once that small gesture of agreement begins, it's hard for their mind not to follow. The body leads, and the mind, almost always, comes along for the ride. And if you can guide their present agreement, imagine how powerful it becomes when you start shaping their future. When you speak not about who they are, but who they will become. Mention their future, they'll think you know them. You're in conversation, and someone says, "You're the kind of person who will do well in this job." Or, "I can see you really thriving in the next few years." The words slip by easily, almost casually, but a part of you holds on to them. Why? Because they didn't describe who you are. They described who you will be. And your mind, strangely, leans in. You want to believe it. You want to become the person they've already seen. Psychologists have found that people place surprising weight on statements about their future, even vague predictions that contain almost no specific information. "You'll probably travel a lot. I can tell you'll succeed in this. I see you making a big change soon." These create a sense of inevitability, of destiny already written. It's not evidence that convinces us, but the suggestion itself. Our brains are drawn to stories that move forward, that have narrative momentum, and when someone writes us into a future, we start believing the script. This is why horoscopes and fortune-telling feel compelling, even when we know they're generic. The Barnum effect makes us accept broad claims as personal truths. But when the prediction feels tied to our own choices, to our specific situation, it's even harder to resist. We want to live up to the version of ourselves someone else has already seen. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because they knew our future, but because we shaped our behavior to match their prediction. You can use this quietly, ethically even, to encourage people toward positive outcomes. Tell a colleague, "You're going to handle this project really well." Not "you might" or "I hope you will," but "you're going to." The certainty matters. It plants an expectation, and expectations shape behavior. Or tell a friend, "I can tell you'll make the right call." You're not making a prediction based on evidence. You're creating a future in their mind, and they'll work to make it real. But here's where it gets eerie, where the manipulation becomes clear. When people believe you've glimpsed their future, they start walking toward it. Not because you knew them better than they know themselves, not because you have any special insight, but because they wanted to prove you right. Because being seen, being understood, being known, even falsely, is one of the deepest human cravings. And when someone offers you a future that looks better than your present, you'll chase it. You'll work toward it. You'll become it, just to make their words true. But what if you want more than agreement or a sense of connection? What if you want loyalty, genuine warmth, the kind of bond that makes people remember you and seek you out? Here's where psychology flips expectation on its head entirely. Ask a favor. They'll like you more. Logic says the opposite, doesn't it? If you want someone to like you, you should do things for them. You should help, give, provide, demonstrate your value through generosity. Be useful. Be kind. Be the person who solves their problems. But psychology has a twist that feels almost backward. Sometimes people like you more when they are the ones helping you. It's called the Benjamin Franklin effect, named after the American statesman who discovered it through his own experience. Franklin noticed that a rival who once disliked him became warmer after he asked to borrow a rare book. The man granted the request and, strangely, began treating Franklin as a friend afterward. Franklin realized something profound. When people invest effort in someone, they rewrite the story in their minds. If I helped you, it must be because I like you. If I went out of my way for you, you must be worth it. Experiments back this up consistently. In studies, participants who were asked small favors, like lending a pencil, reviewing notes, or offering advice, rated the requester more positively afterward. The favor created not resentment, but justification. The mind resists contradiction, and so it aligns feelings with actions. I helped you, therefore I must care about you. The help came first, and the affection followed to make sense of the help. You've probably felt it in your own life without recognizing the pattern. A co-worker asks you to explain how to use a tool at work. The moment you give that explanation, you feel closer to them, not because of what they did for you, but because of what you did for them. The investment of your time and knowledge created a bond. A friend asks for your take on a difficult decision. By the time you've finished explaining your perspective, you've invested mental energy, and that investment becomes emotional connection. You care more about their problem now because you've put part of yourself into solving it. This effect is powerful in subtle ways that most people never recognize. Leaders sometimes build loyalty, not through grand gestures, but by asking their teams for input, making employees feel valued through consultation rather than praise. When you ask someone's opinion, you're not just gathering information, you're making them invest in you, and that investment creates attachment. Negotiators build rapport by seeking clarification, positioning themselves as learners rather than adversaries. "Help me understand your perspective" isn't just politeness, it's strategy. It makes the other side invest effort in explaining. And that effort creates a stake in the relationship. Even a stranger becomes friendlier if they've invested effort in helping you. Because helping creates a psychological footprint, a mark they've left on your life that makes you memorable, makes you matter. The beauty of this technique is that it doesn't feel like manipulation to the person doing the helping. They walk away feeling good about themselves, feeling useful, feeling needed, and those feelings attach to you. You become the person who made them feel capable, the person who recognized their expertise, the person worth helping again. It's a loop that reinforces itself. The more they help, the more they like you, the more willing they are to help again. So when you want to plant trust, when you want to create genuine warmth, don't always try to impress with knowledge or win favor through endless generosity. Ask a question instead. Let them explain. Let them guide. Let them teach. Request their opinion. Seek their advice. Let them feel the satisfaction of being helpful. Because the more they invest in you, the more they convince themselves they've already chosen to like you. And once that choice is made in their mind, once they've justified their investment with affection, it becomes nearly impossible to undo. And once they've helped you, once they've started to invest, there's a word that makes almost any request feel reasonable, even when the reasoning itself is nonsense. Use because, even if the reason's nonsense. In the 1970s, psychologist Ellen Langer ran a curious experiment that revealed something unsettling about how our minds process requests. Students waited in line at a library photocopier. A researcher would approach and cut in with one of three requests. First, "May I use the machine?" Simple, direct, no explanation. Second, "May I use the machine because I'm in a rush?" A reason provided, urgent and understandable, and oddly. Third, "May I use the machine because I have to make copies?" The results were startling. The bare request worked about 60% of the time. Add the word "because" with a legitimate reason, being in a rush, and compliance jumped to over 90%. But here's what revealed the trick. The nonsense reason, "because I have to make copies," also achieved over 90% compliance. The brain didn't care about the logic. It didn't stop to process that making copies is the obvious reason anyone would use a photocopier. It latched onto the trigger. Because equals reason. Reason equals approval. We like to think of ourselves as rational, carefully weighing the merit of requests before deciding. But often we act on autopilot, especially for small decisions. The word "because" taps into an ancient shortcut. If there's a reason, it must be valid, even if it's nonsense, even if it's circular logic that explains nothing. The presence of the word itself is enough. You can hear echoes of this everywhere once you start listening for it. Because it's policy. What policy? Why does the policy exist? The answer doesn't matter because the word because has already done its work. Because everyone does it. Is everyone actually doing it? Is that a good reason? The mind doesn't stop to ask because the structure of the sentence feels complete. Because that's how it works. How what works? Why does it work that way? The questions don't come because has provided the illusion of explanation. The explanations are empty, circular, sometimes absurd. Yet they silence resistance. They make us nod and move on. The presence of a reason matters more than the reason itself. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, and because signals the pattern of legitimate explanation, even when no legitimate explanation exists. You can see this weaponized in corporate speak, in political rhetoric, in everyday manipulation. We need to do this because it's important. Why is it important? Because we need to do it. The circle completes itself, and most people don't notice because their brain heard because and filed the request under adequately explained. So if you want to slip past someone's defenses, if you want to make a request that might otherwise face resistance, sometimes all you need is that single word. Frame your ask with because and add almost anything after it. The reason doesn't have to be compelling. It doesn't even have to be logical. It just has to exist. Because gives weight to even the lightest request. And in a world where logic often takes a back seat to the feeling of logic, the sound of a reason is enough to open the door. But what if they're still holding back? What if you need them to keep talking, to reveal more than they intended, to open up layers they usually keep hidden? There's a mirror trick for words that works like magic. Repeat their last words. They'll keep talking. Someone says, "It was a tough day at work." You could respond with sympathy, with advice, with your own story. But instead, you answer softly, echoing, "A tough day." They nod, and suddenly more spills out. Details they weren't planning to share, frustrations they were keeping inside, stories that reveal more about how they're really feeling. That's the effect of repetition. You don't need clever questions. You don't need to probe or pry. You just need their own words handed back to them like a mirror. Psychologists call this reflective listening, and it's one of the most powerful techniques in therapy, in interrogation, in any conversation where you want someone to open up. In studies of conversation flow, people who had their last words echoed felt more understood, even when no real empathy was shown, even when the person echoing was doing it mechanically. The echo acted like a mirror, and mirrors invite people to look closer, to see more, to explore what they're seeing. You've heard therapists use this constantly. A client says, "I'm feeling stuck." The therapist replies, "Stuck," not as a question, just as a reflection. And the client, hearing their own word returned, leans in and expands. "Yeah, stuck. Like I know what I should do, but I can't make myself do it." And the expansion happens naturally, almost involuntarily. The echo created space for more words to fill. Negotiators use it too, often without the other side realizing what's happening. Someone states their position. "We need this done by Friday." The negotiator echoes, "By Friday." And suddenly, the other side starts talking again. sometimes revealing flexibility they hadn't intended to show. Well, Friday, ideally, but I suppose if it took until Monday. The repetition made them reconsider, made them hear their own words and evaluate whether they meant them as absolutely as they sounded. Even in casual talk, the technique works beautifully. A friend says, "I'm not sure what to do about this situation." You reply, "Not sure." The pause that follows almost always fills itself. They continue, "I mean, part of me thinks I should just let it go, but another part feels like I need to say something." They're working through it aloud now, and all you did was echo 2 words back. The trick works because repetition feels like attention. In a world where most people are waiting for their turn to talk rather than actually listening, when someone repeats your words back to you, it signals that they heard you, that they're with you, that what you said matters enough to be worth repeating. We are drawn to elaborate when we believe someone is listening closely, and repeating someone's words is the simplest, most undeniable proof of attention. But there's something deeper happening too. When you hear your own words from someone else's mouth, you hear them differently. They become separate from you, objects you can examine. And that examination often leads to expansion, clarification, or deeper truth. The echo makes you a witness to your own thoughts. So the next time you want someone to open up, don't push, don't pry, don't fill the silence with your own stories or advice. Just echo the last piece of their thought. Let their words hang in the air, reflected back. It feels natural, disarming, even flattering. And before they notice what's happening, they'll be telling you everything they hadn't planned to share, simply because you gave their words back to them and let them decide what to do with the echo. And if words can create contagion, if repetition can open people up, then something far more primal can spread even faster through a group. Fake a yawn and make the room tired. You yawn. It feels small, unremarkable, just a reflexive response to fatigue or boredom or the stuffiness of the room. But then someone across the room yawns, too, and another. Within minutes, the whole group is stretching, eyes watering, fighting the same sudden drowsiness. It's not coincidence. It's not even all that mysterious. It's contagion, one of the strangest forms of social mimicry we experience. Yawning is one of the most contagious behaviors humans exhibit. Scientists still debate why it spreads with such reliability, but they agree on this. When one person yawns, others almost can't resist. Some researchers suggest it's rooted in empathy. The more connected you feel to someone, the more likely you are to catch their yawn. Studies show that you're more likely to yawn when a friend or family member yawns than when a stranger does. Others think it began as a survival mechanism, a way of synchronizing alertness in groups. In our evolutionary past, groups that rested and woke together survived better. Yawning might have been a signal, time to wind down, time to prepare for sleep, time to lower our guard because the group is safe. That ancient programming is still with us, operating beneath conscious awareness. Whatever the cause, its power is clear and measurable. A single yawn can ripple through a room faster than laughter, faster than applause, and it doesn't stop with yawns. Coughs spread the same way. Laughter is famously contagious. Laugh tracks on television exist because hearing laughter makes us more likely to laugh ourselves. Even posture can spread. In a meeting where one person slouches, others often follow without realizing it. The body follows what it sees long before the mind makes sense of it. Mirror neurons fire when we observe actions, preparing our bodies to perform the same action. It's why watching someone get injured makes us wince, why seeing someone smile makes our own lips curve. We're wired to sync with those around us, to become part of the group rhythm. This is where it becomes more than curiosity, where it crosses into the realm of influence and control. If you want to shift the mood of a group, sometimes you don't need to speak at all. A yawn in a tense meeting can subtly lower energy, can signal that perhaps it's time to wrap up, that the group is tired even if no one has said so. A stretch can suggest that people need a break. A shift in posture can ripple through the room, changing how people sit, how they hold themselves, how engaged they feel. The body carries signals that minds obey without question. And the person who understands this, who can deploy a yawn or a stretch or a shift in energy at the right moment, can guide a group's mood without ever making an argument or giving an order. So the next time you watch a room move in unison, ask yourself, how many choices are truly their own? How many behaviors that feel spontaneous are actually echoes, reflections, contagions spread from one person to the rest? And how many are just responses to someone else's breath, someone else's body, someone else's silent signal that the group, without words, decided to follow? But mimicry isn't limited to unconscious gestures or contagious behaviors. Sometimes, the most powerful influence comes when you stop trying to look like you have all the answers and instead make them the teacher, the expert, the one with knowledge worth sharing. Ask for help, then let them teach you. It feels backward, doesn't it? If you want someone to respect you, shouldn't you be the one showing knowledge, offering answers, demonstrating competence? If you want to build a relationship, shouldn't you be proving your worth by being useful, by solving their problems rather than creating your own? Yet psychology shows the opposite, reveals a pattern that defies common sense. People often like you more when they are the ones helping you. In studies of relationships, those who were asked for advice or small acts of assistance consistently reported warmer feelings toward the requester afterward. Why? Because we justify our actions to ourselves after we've performed them. If I helped you, it must be because I value you. And if I taught you something, if I took time out of my day to explain or demonstrate or guide, it must be because you're worth the effort. The brain creates the story after the fact, and that story binds us closer than gratitude from the other direction ever could. Think about it in your own experience. A co-worker asks you to explain how to use a tool at work, how to navigate a system, how to solve a problem you've already figured out. The moment you give that explanation, the moment you invest your knowledge and time, you feel closer to them, not because of what they did for you, but because of what you did for them. The investment of mental energy, the effort of teaching, creates a bond. You now have a stake in their success because you've contributed to it. A friend asks for your take on a difficult decision they're facing. By the time you've finished explaining your perspective, offering your wisdom, considering their options aloud, you've invested emotional and cognitive resources, and that investment becomes connection. You care more about their problem now because you've put part of yourself into solving it. Their outcome matters to you because you've contributed to shaping it. This effect is powerful in subtle ways that most people never consciously recognize. Leaders sometimes build loyalty, not through grand gestures or charismatic speeches, but by asking their teams for input, making employees feel valued through consultation rather than through praise or rewards. When you ask someone's opinion, when you genuinely seek their advice, you're not just gathering information, you're making them invest in you. And that investment creates attachment, ownership, loyalty. Negotiators build rapport by seeking clarification, by positioning themselves as learners rather than adversaries. "Help me understand your perspective" isn't just politeness or strategy in the obvious sense. It's a way of making the other side invest effort in explaining. And that effort creates a stake in the relationship. The more they explain, the more they want you to understand, the more they care about reaching an agreement because they've already invested so much in making you see their point. Even a stranger becomes friendlier, more open, more generous if they've invested effort in helping you. Ask for directions and they'll point the way, but ask them to help you understand the neighborhood, to explain the best route, to share their knowledge of the area. And by the time they're finished, you're not strangers anymore. The helping created connection. The teaching created warmth. Because helping creates a psychological footprint, a mark they've left on your life that makes you memorable, makes you matter. The beauty of this technique, the reason it works so reliably, is that it doesn't feel like manipulation to the person doing the helping. They don't walk away thinking, "I've been tricked into liking this person." They walk away feeling good about themselves, feeling useful, feeling needed, feeling competent. And those feelings attach to you. You become the person who made them feel capable, the person who recognized their expertise, the person who saw value in what they know. You become, in their mind, worth helping again. So when you want to plant trust, when you want to create genuine warmth that lasts beyond a single interaction, don't always try to impress with your own knowledge or win favor through endless generosity. Ask a question instead. Let them explain. Let them guide. Let them teach. Request their opinion on something they care about. Seek their advice on a problem they've solved. Let them feel the deep satisfaction of being helpful, of being needed, of having knowledge that matters. Because the more they invest in you, the more they convince themselves they've already chosen to like you. And once that choice is made in their mind, once they've justified their investment with affection, it becomes nearly impossible to undo. And while we're talking about creating lasting impressions, about making moments memorable, there's a physical anchor that most people overlook entirely. A technique so simple, it seems almost meaningless until you understand how memory actually works. Touch an object while talking. They'll remember. You sit at a table and talk, your hand resting gently on a coffee cup as you make your point, or you gesture toward a folder on the desk, your fingers brushing against it as you explain an important concept. The words matter. Yes, the content of what you're saying is important. But what stays in memory isn't just the words. It's the object they were tied to, the physical anchor that gave abstract ideas a place to live in the material world. Psychologists have found that memory clings to anchors. that our brains remember information more easily when it's paired with sensory experiences. In experiments, people recalled facts more easily when information was paired with a gesture that touched or emphasized a nearby object. The physical link worked as a hook in the mind, something tangible for the abstract to grab onto. It's why teachers instinctively point to diagrams as they explain complex concepts, why salespeople place products in customers' hands while describing features, why lawyers hold up pieces of evidence during closing arguments. The object becomes more than background, more than decoration or coincidence. It becomes the stage where the memory lives, the physical location that the mind can return to when trying to recall what was said. When you touch something while speaking, you're not just talking, you're creating a multi-sensory experience. The brain loves multiple inputs, craves them actually. Vision plus touch plus words equals a memory that's reinforced from 3 angles instead of 1. A memory that has depth and texture instead of just sound. And here's the quiet advantage that makes this technique so powerful. People rarely realize this is happening. They don't walk away thinking, "I remember that because they touched the table." They believe they're recalling your words because they were important or profound or relevant. In truth, their memory was helped along by the tactile anchor, the object you chose to make part of the story, the physical marker you placed in their memory. Salespeople have known this instinctively for generations, passing the technique down through experience, even without understanding the psychology behind it. They don't just describe the car. They put the keys in your hand, let you feel the weight, the metal, the reality of ownership. They don't just talk about the fabric of a couch. They make you feel it between your fingers, run your hand along the texture. They don't just show you a phone. They put it in your palm, let you hold it, make it feel like yours before you've bought it. The object becomes part of the pitch, and the pitch becomes impossible to forget because it lived in your hand, not just in your ears. Magicians use it too, though in their case the goal is different. They hand you a card to inspect, make you hold the coin, involve you physically in the trick. The object becomes part of the experience, part of the memory, which makes the impossible trick even more vivid and unforgettable because you held the evidence in your own hands. You can use this in meetings, in presentations, in conversations both professional and personal. If you want someone to remember a key point, touch the table as you say it. The gesture doesn't need to be dramatic, just intentional, just enough to create a sensory marker. If you want a story to stick, hold something as you tell it. Let the object become part of the narrative. If you're explaining something complex, point to a visual aid but touch it too. Make it real and present and tangible. The object becomes a vessel for the memory, a container that holds the words and ideas and emotions of the moment. Their mind can return to it long after the conversation has ended, can revisit that table, that cup, that folder, and in doing so, revisit everything you said. So the next time you want your words to last, don't just let them drift into the air where they'll dissipate and fade. Give them a place to land. Touch the table, the pen, the book. Anchor your ideas to objects that exist in the physical world. Let your listener's memory cling to something solid, something they can visualize, something that exists beyond the ephemeral nature of speech. Because when words are tied to the world, when they're anchored to objects you can see and touch, they don't just pass through consciousness and disappear. They stay rooted in place by something as simple as your fingertips on an object, creating a bridge between abstract thought and material reality. Of course, memory is one thing, making people remember what you said. But desire is another entirely. And there's a psychological trigger that makes people want something more intensely than any sales pitch, any logical argument, any feature list ever could. Make it seem rare. They'll want it more. Scarcity changes everything. A product in abundance feels ordinary, unremarkable, easy to walk away from. It'll be there tomorrow, next week, next month. There's no urgency, no pressure, no fear of missing out. But a product in short supply? It feels valuable, even if nothing else has changed, even if the product itself is identical in every measurable way. This is the scarcity principle, and it drives choices in ways we don't like to admit, in ways that bypass our rational thinking entirely. Classic experiments show it with painful clarity. In one famous study, people were given the same cookies, literally the same recipe, the same batch, identical in every possible way. Sometimes they were presented from a jar full of cookies, other times from a jar with only 2 left. The cookies were identical, baked at the same time, stored the same way. Yet those from the scarce jar were rated as more desirable, more delicious, even more special. Participants swore they tasted better. The difference was perception, not reality. The difference was scarcity, not quality. You see this everywhere once you start looking. Once you recognize the pattern, online shops flashing "only 2 left in stock" in red letters next to the Add to Cart button. Ticket sellers reminding you with countdown timers that seats are disappearing fast, that other people are looking at this event right now. Limited edition releases that create lines around the block. People camping overnight, not because the product is objectively better, but because it won't be available tomorrow. The scarcity itself becomes the value. Even relationships follow this pattern, though we hate to admit it. The friend who seems too available, who always says yes, who's never busy, slowly fades into the background of our attention. But the friend who's harder to reach, whose time feels valuable, whose attention feels earned, they become magnetic, not because they're better friends, but because their scarcity makes every interaction feel more precious, more meaningful, more worth fighting for. Scarcity works because it taps into survival instincts buried deep in our evolutionary past. For our ancestors, scarcity was real and dangerous. If food was rare, you grabbed it immediately or you starved. If an opportunity appeared, you seized it instantly or you lost it forever. Hesitation meant death. That urgency, that fear of missing out, is still wired into us at a level so deep we can't reason our way past it. That's the hidden power of scarcity, the reason it works, even when we know we're being manipulated. By making something appear limited, you don't just raise interest, you create urgency that overrides rational decision-making. You push people to act now instead of later. You make them fear missing out more than they fear making a bad choice. And once that fear is activated, once that ancient panic sets in, logic takes a back seat. The emotional brain takes over, and the emotional brain doesn't care about value or quality or whether you actually need the thing. It only cares about not losing access. Marketing departments know this intimately. They create artificial scarcity even when none exists. Limited time offer when the offer will be back next month. While supplies last, when supplies will be restocked. Exclusive access when it's not exclusive at all. The words trigger the response even when the scarcity is manufactured, even when it's obviously fake, because the trigger is automatic and runs deeper than conscious awareness. So if you want your offer, your idea, your product, even your presence to carry more weight, to feel more valuable, don't make it endless. Don't make it easy. Don't be always available, always accessible, always there. Make it rare. Make it limited. Make people feel like they might lose access if they don't act now. Because what's scarce feels precious, regardless of its actual value. And what feels precious rarely gets ignored. The moment someone believes they might lose the opportunity to have something, they'll fight twice as hard to keep it, even if, moments before, they weren't sure they wanted it in the first place. And once you've created desire through scarcity, once you've made them want what you're offering, there's a way to make your words land with the weight of absolute authority, to speak in a way that makes people lean forward and listen as though every syllable carries wisdom. Speak slower. You'll sound like authority. In a world where everyone rushes to be heard, where conversations move at the speed of anxiety and impatience, the slow voice cuts through everything else. Fast talk can feel anxious, rehearsed, even desperate, like someone trying to convince you before you have time to think, before you can notice the holes in their argument. But when someone speaks with patience, letting silence stretch between words, letting each sentence breathe before the next one begins, people listen. They assume that if you're willing to take your time, what you're saying must be worth the wait. Psychologists studying communication patterns found that slower speakers were consistently rated as more intelligent, confident, and persuasive than those who raced through their sentences. The content was often identical in these studies, the same words, the same arguments, the same information. But the pacing changed everything. The difference was rhythm, and rhythm shaped perception more powerfully than content ever could. Quick speech signals urgency, nervousness, a lack of confidence in what's being said. It suggests you're not sure people will listen if you slow down, that you need to get the words out before attention wanders. Slow speech signals control, certainty, authority. It says, I know you'll listen, because what I'm saying matters. I don't need to rush because I'm not afraid of silence, not worried about losing you. Think of the leaders you've not worried about losing you. Think of the leaders you've heard speak, the ones who commanded attention effortlessly. The professor who never hurried through a lecture, but instead gave every sentence room to breathe. Let concepts settle before moving to the next. You hung on every word, not because they were particularly eloquent, but because the pacing made everything feel important, deliberate, worth absorbing fully before moving forward. The storyteller who drew you in with long pauses, making silence part of the tale itself, using empty space as punctuation more powerful than words. The negotiator who waited just long enough after stating his position for the other side to fill the gap with nervous words, with concessions, with second guessing. None of them shouted, none of them rushed. Their power came from pace, from the willingness to let time stretch. And here's the hidden effect that makes this technique even more powerful. Slowing down doesn't only change how you sound to others, it changes how others feel in your presence. People unconsciously match the rhythm of those they're talking to. When you slow your words, they slow their thoughts, their breathing eases, their mental pace adjusts to match yours, their attention sharpens because you've given them permission to stop rushing, to settle into the conversation. That's why slowing down works like authority. It's not just that you sound more confident or intelligent, though you do. It's that you create a space where others can actually listen, where the frantic pace of normal conversation drops away and something deeper becomes possible. You're not just speaking differently. You're changing the entire rhythm of the interaction. It's the difference between being one more voice in the noise and being the voice that cuts through it. In a room full of people talking quickly, competing for attention, rushing through their points, the person who speaks slowly stands out completely. Not because they're louder, but because they're different, because they're not competing, because they've claimed time itself as their territory. Watch how this works in difficult conversations, in moments of conflict or tension. The person speaking quickly, rushing through their defense or their argument, sounds reactive, emotional, uncontrolled. But the person who speaks slowly, who pauses between thoughts, who lets silence exist without filling it frantically, that person sounds calm, considered, in control of themselves and the situation. So, when you want your message to carry weight, when you want people to believe what you're saying without having to prove every point, resist the urge to rush. Let your words walk instead of sprint. Pause between thoughts. Let sentences end completely before beginning the next. Give your listeners time to absorb rather than racing past their comprehension. Because, in the end, people don't just hear the slow voice. They believe it, they trust it, they follow it, not because of what it says, but because of how it refuses to hurry, refuses to rush, refuses to act like it needs your permission to take all the time it needs. And while pacing shapes how people hear your words, there's another vocal technique that determines whether your statements feel like suggestions or commands, whether people hear openings for debate or final decisions. Lower your voice at the end. It feels final. Say a sentence out loud. We'll talk tomorrow. Now say it again. But this time let your voice rise slightly at the end, the way it does when asking a question. We'll talk tomorrow. The words are almost identical, but the feeling isn't. The first sounds certain, decided, already settled. The second sounds uncertain, like you're asking permission, like you're still open to negotiation. Now try it once more, but let your voice fall at the end, dropping in pitch as you reach the final word. We'll talk tomorrow. Feel the difference? That downward inflection makes the statement feel final, authoritative, closed to debate. It's not a suggestion. It's not a request. It's a fact being delivered, a decision already made. Linguists and psychologists have studied how pitch shapes perception for decades. Rising tones make us think of questions, of unfinished business, of a speaker still seeking approval or agreement. They signal uncertainty, openness, invitation for response. Falling tones, by contrast, signal closure. They sound like confidence, authority, finality. They tell the listener that the thought is complete, the decision made, the conversation moving forward. The shift is subtle, just a few notes of pitch, barely noticeable if you're not listening for it. But the brain notices it instantly, processes it faster than conscious thought. You've heard it in leaders, in people who command rooms without raising their voices. Military commanders never give orders with rising pitch. The downward inflection is automatic in their speech, drilled into them because it's essential. "Move out," said with a rising tone, sounds like a question, like something that could be debated. Said with falling pitch, it's an order that your body wants to obey before your mind has finished processing it. Negotiators who end proposals with downward tones sound more persuasive, less open to debate. They're not asking if this works for you. They're stating what will work. And the falling pitch suggests that further discussion isn't necessary. Even in everyday conversations, that drop at the end of a sentence makes people nod, as if the matter is already settled, as if agreement is the natural response. It works because we've been trained for centuries to hear falling notes as endings. In music, melodies resolve downward. The final note of a phrase typically falls, signaling completion, resolution, rest. In speech, a sinking tone tells us the thought is complete, the sentence finished. When your voice falls, the listener's mind follows. They feel less inclined to argue, more inclined to accept. The falling pitch doesn't just end the sentence, it closes the door on disagreement. You can practice this consciously, especially in moments where you need your words to land with authority. When stating a decision, let your voice drop. When setting a boundary, let the final word sink. When closing a deal or ending a debate, let your pitch fall like a gavel coming down. The words themselves might be gentle, but the intonation tells the truth. This is decided. This is final. This is how it is. Even in personal relationships, in moments where you need to be clear about something non-negotiable, the falling pitch helps. "I need you to hear me on this," said with rising tones sounds like pleading, like hoping they'll listen. Said with falling tone, it sounds like a statement of fact, like something they need to take seriously because you've already decided it's important. So the next time you want your words to land with weight, to feel final and authoritative and closed to debate, focus less on what you're saying and more on how it ends. Lower your voice, even slightly, and let it rest there. Let the pitch sink. Let the sentence fall into place like a period at the end of a thought. Because sometimes the difference between a suggestion and a decision is nothing more than the way your voice falls. And when it falls, when it settles into that lower register and stays there, people hear it differently. They hear closure, they hear certainty, they hear authority, and most of the time they stop questioning and start accepting. But authority isn't the only path to influence. Sometimes, the fastest way to make someone feel good about you is to let them feel good about themselves. And one of the easiest ways to do that is surprisingly counterintuitive. Let them correct you. They'll feel superior. Most of us spend our lives trying not to be wrong. We polish our facts, double-check our dates, rehearse details in our heads so no one can catch us slipping. So we never look foolish or uninformed. Being wrong feels like failure, like losing status, like giving someone else power over us. But here's the paradox, the strange reversal that manipulators understand instinctively. Being corrected can actually make people like you more, not less. Psychologists call this the ego boost effect. When someone points out your mistake, they don't just fix the error, they feel sharper, smarter, more capable. That burst of pride, that moment of, I knew that and they didn't, creates a positive emotional state. And that feeling doesn't stay with them in isolation. It reshapes how they see you. Instead of disliking you for the slip, they like you for giving them the chance to shine, for creating a moment where they could demonstrate their knowledge or attention to detail. Teachers sometimes use this deliberately, strategically even. They'll write a small error on the board, a date that's off by 1 year, a formula with a missing symbol, and wait. Within seconds, a student catches it, calls it out, beams with satisfaction. The class admires the student for being sharp. The student feels proud, feels recognized. And strangely, that student often develops more warmth toward the teacher afterward, because the teacher created the opportunity for that moment of success. You see it in conversations too, more often than you'd think. Someone corrects you on a date, a name, a statistic. If you respond with grace, "Oh, you're right, thank you," they walk away, not resentful, but satisfied. They proved they were paying attention. They demonstrated knowledge. They helped you. And helping you, as we discussed earlier, makes them like you more. The correction itself becomes a small favor they've done. And favors create bonds. It works because the human mind hates contradictions. If I corrected you, I must have been engaged in what you were saying. If I helped you get something right, I must care about accuracy and about you. The action itself becomes evidence of connection, and our minds create narratives that make sense of our actions. Of course, there's a limit. Make too many mistakes and you look incompetent, unprepared, careless. But the occasional small error, especially in informal settings, can actually enhance likability. It makes you seem human, accessible, not trying to be perfect. And when someone catches that error, when they step in with the correction, you've given them a gift, the opportunity to feel smart, helpful, needed. Some manipulators use this consciously, deliberately making small factual errors to draw people in, to make them feel invested. Get someone to correct you, and they're now part of your conversation, engaged in your success, holding a small stake in making sure you get things right. It's subtle, but it works. So instead of fearing mistakes, recognize their hidden value in building relationships. When someone corrects you, thank them genuinely. Acknowledge what they know. Make them feel good about helping. Because in that moment, you're not losing status. You're giving them a boost. And people remember those who made them feel capable, intelligent, valuable. Sometimes letting someone correct you is more powerful than being flawless. Because perfection creates distance, while small errors create opportunities for connection. And speaking of questions, of ways to make people open up without putting them on the defensive, there's a simple shift in how you phrase things that changes everything about the response you'll receive. Ask, "What would you do?" Not, "Why?" There's a profound difference between asking someone why and asking them what they would do. At first, the distinction seems subtle, almost trivial, but the response it draws out couldn't be more different. The emotional tone shifts completely. the entire direction of the conversation changes with a single word. When you ask, "Why did you do that?" the brain goes on the defensive immediately. It feels like judgment, like interrogation, like you're demanding justification for their choices. The question assumes something was wrong, that an explanation is owed, that they need to defend themselves. People scramble for excuses, rationalizations, anything to protect themselves from what feels like an attack. The wall goes up. The conversation becomes adversarial. Trust evaporates. But when you ask, "What would you do?" something else happens entirely. The defensive guard lowers. Instead of feeling accused, the person feels included, invited to problem solve with you. Their brain shifts from protecting themselves to imagining possibilities, from justification to creativity. The question positions them as a consultant, an advisor, someone whose judgment you value. And with that shift, you gain not just information, but cooperation. Psychologists studying interview techniques have shown that open, forward-looking questions make people more willing to share and more honest when they do. Police negotiators know this instinctively. Asking a suspect, "Why did you do it?" often results in silence, in demands for a lawyer, in immediate hostility. But asking, "What would you do in my position?" or "What do you think should happen next?" opens dialogue, creates the feeling of collaboration rather than confrontation. Therapists know it too. "Why are you feeling this way?" can make clients defensive about their emotions, as though feelings need justification. But "What would help you feel better?" or "What would you like to do about this?" empowers them, makes them active participants in their own healing rather than defendants in an emotional trial. Even in everyday disagreements, in moments of friction between friends or partners, the framing makes all the difference. "Why didn't you tell me?" sounds like accusation, puts the other person on trial. "What would you want me to do if our situations were reversed?" invites empathy, perspective-taking, mutual understanding. The difference is temporal too. "Why" looks backward, demands accounting for the past, implies that the past was wrong. "What would you do?" looks forward, invites planning, suggests that the future can be different. One is about blame, the other is about solutions, and most people, when offered the choice between defending the past and shaping the future, will choose the future. Think of the last time someone asked you why. Really think about how it felt. Chances are, even if the question was innocent, you felt a flicker of defensiveness, a tightening in your chest, a need to explain yourself. Now think of the last time someone asked what you do, what you think, what your perspective is. Chances are you felt invited, included, respected. So the next time you want someone to reveal more, to step into your perspective, to really engage with a problem, rather than defending against it, don't push them back with why. Pull them forward with what. Ask them what they would do, what they think should happen, what their advice would be. Because the questions we ask don't just unlock answers, they unlock cooperation, trust, and the willingness to work with you rather than against you. And while we're discussing the power of questions and silence, there's another technique that uses absence itself as a tool, that turns emptiness into pressure and makes people reveal more than any direct questioning ever could. Delay answering. People fill in the gaps. Conversation moves quickly in most contexts. Someone asks you a question, and you feel the pull to answer right away, to fill the silence before it becomes uncomfortable, to keep the rhythm flowing. But if you resist that pull, if you let the silence stretch just a few seconds longer than feels natural, something interesting happens. People start to fill the space for you. They elaborate, they clarify, they add details they weren't planning to share. And often, they reveal far more than they would have if you'd responded immediately. Psychologists studying dialogue patterns have found that most people can only tolerate a few seconds of silence before discomfort sets in. The mind hates unfinished business, abhors the vacuum of unanswered questions. When your answer doesn't come immediately, when the expected response fails to arrive, the other person often rushes to bridge the gap. They repeat the question differently. They add context. They soften their demand or reveal their real concern. Sometimes they even answer the question themselves, telling you what they're really asking, what they're actually worried about. Negotiators use this instinct constantly, weaponize it even. A buyer names a price, then waits. Just waits. Says nothing. Doesn't nod. Doesn't shake their head. Doesn't give any signal of agreement or disagreement. The silence grows heavy, becomes almost physical in its presence. The seller, unable to bear the quiet, often starts talking again. Of course, I could go down to. The seller makes concessions to fill the void, offers compromises nobody asked for, reveals their bottom line simply because the silence felt unbearable. Interviewers know it too, use it to great effect. A candidate finishes answering a question. The interviewer doesn't respond immediately, just looks at them with an expression of mild interest. The silence lingers, and suddenly, without any prompting, the candidate starts talking again. They elaborate on their answer, reveal doubts they had hidden, add qualifications and details that make the picture more complete and sometimes more damaging. The silence extracted information that no question could have. You've probably seen this in everyday life without recognizing the pattern. A friend tells a story, then stops. You say nothing, just keep listening. Without prompting, they start again, filling the quiet with extra layers of truth, admitting details they had glossed over, revealing feelings they had kept hidden. The pause invited them deeper into their own story. The trick works because silence feels like pressure. We're social creatures, built for connection and communication. Empty space in conversation feels wrong, feels like something broken that needs fixing. And our instinct, when faced with that wrongness, is to fix it, even if fixing it means giving away more than we should, revealing cards we meant to keep close. It's especially effective when someone is lying or hiding something. Truth is easy to let sit in silence, but lies need maintenance, need elaboration, need constant feeding to stay alive. A liar faced with silence will often keep talking, adding details to make the lie more convincing, and in doing so, creating contradictions that wouldn't have existed if they just stopped. But silence as delay works for honest responses too. When you ask someone a question and they answer, then you pause before responding. That pause makes them reconsider their answer. Did I say that right? Did I explain clearly? Should I add something? The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their words back to them, making them hear what they said and decide if it's complete. And most of the time, they'll decide it isn't, and they'll fill the silence with more. This technique requires confidence to pull off. You have to be comfortable with discomfort, willing to let awkwardness exist without rushing to resolve it. Most people can't do it. They feel the silence and panic, jump in to fill it themselves, squander the pressure they could have used. But if you can tolerate those few seconds of empty air, if you can let the pause breathe and grow, you'll find that people tell you things they never planned to say. So the next time you're asked something important, something you need time to consider, resist the reflex to answer instantly. Let the silence breathe. Count to 3 in your head. Let the question hang in the air for just a moment longer than feels natural. Watch as the other person, uncomfortable with the void, rushes to fill it, adding context, revealing assumptions, showing you their real concern. Because sometimes the most revealing words aren't the ones you speak. They're the ones spoken into the spaces you deliberately leave empty. And once you understand the power of reflection and repetition, there's an even more direct way to create connection and understanding, or at least the appearance of it. Use their words, not yours. There's a strange comfort in hearing your own words repeated back to you. It feels like proof that the other person understands, that they're not just hearing, but listening, that they're tracking with you rather than waiting for their turn to talk. And that's exactly why using someone's words instead of your own can bend the direction of a conversation, can make people trust you without quite knowing why. Psychologists call this verbal mirroring, and in experiments, people rated conversations as warmer and more persuasive when their own phrasing was reflected back to them. The effect wasn't in the content. The meaning could be identical. It was in the familiarity, in the recognition of their own language coming from someone else's mouth. Hearing your own words creates trust because it feels like agreement, like alignment, like the other person is on your wavelength. You can see this everywhere once you start paying attention. A customer says, "I'm worried about the cost." A mediocre salesperson might reply, "Let me address your budget concerns." Fine, technically correct, but the words have changed. Budget isn't cost. Concerns aren't worry. The translation, however minor, creates distance. But a skilled salesperson says, "I hear you're worried about the cost." The exact words echo back. The customer hears themselves in the response, and something clicks. They feel understood at a level that bypasses logic. A friend says, "I'm stressed about time." You could respond, "It sounds like you're busy," or "You seem overwhelmed." Both might be true, but say instead, "Time has been stressful for you," and something different happens. The word time echoes back. Stressful echoes back. They hear themselves in your response, and the connection deepens. It's simple, almost absurdly simple, but it works. This happens because our minds lean toward what feels familiar. Words we've spoken ourselves already carry emotional weight, already exist in our mental landscape with meanings and associations we've built. When they're handed back to us, it feels like recognition rather than translation. And recognition makes people open up, makes them agree, makes them connect more easily. Think about arguments you've had, conflicts where you felt misunderstood. Often, the frustration came not from disagreement, but from the feeling that the other person wasn't even hearing your words, was translating everything you said into their own vocabulary, their own framework. I said, I was tired, not that I didn't want to go. The difference matters because your word, tired, carried specific meaning that their word, didn't want to go, failed to capture. Now think about moments when you felt truly heard. Chances are, the other person was using your language, echoing your words back, creating the experience of being understood at the level of language itself, not just meaning. It's the difference between translation and reflection builds trust faster. Therapists are trained in this extensively. When a client says, "I feel trapped," the therapist doesn't say, "You feel confined," or "You feel restricted." They say, "You feel trapped." The word matters, the client's word, because that word was chosen for a reason, carries connotations and feelings that synonyms don't capture. Reflecting it back honors that choice, validates the feeling at the level of language. Negotiators use this to build rapport and extract information. When someone describes their position, the skilled negotiator uses their exact phrases when summarizing. "So, what you're saying is," followed by their words, not a paraphrase. This makes the other side feel understood, makes them more willing to engage, more likely to trust that this person gets it. But here's where it becomes manipulation rather than just good communication. You can use someone's words to lead them places they weren't planning to go. By echoing their language, you create trust. And once that trust exists, you can subtly shift the words, introduce new phrases while maintaining enough of their original language to keep the sense of being understood. They follow your language shift because you've established that you understand their language first. It's a reminder that persuasion doesn't always come from new ideas, from brilliant arguments or novel perspectives. Sometimes it comes from giving people their own ideas back, shaped just enough to guide the direction you want. Because when they hear their own words echoed, they stop resisting. They feel understood. And once someone feels understood, they're far more likely to follow where you lead, because you've proven you speak their language, and people trust those who speak like they do. And while mirroring creates trust, and verbal repetition creates connection, there's a phrase that seems to release people from obligation, but actually increases compliance in ways that feel almost magical. Tell them they're free. They'll obey more. It sounds backward, contradictory even. If you want someone to do something, telling them they don't have to should weaken compliance, should give them an easy out, an excuse to refuse. But psychology reveals the opposite. Telling someone they're free to choose often makes them more likely to comply, not less. Psychologists call this the "but you are free" effect, and in experiments, the results are striking. When a request for help or money included the reminder that participants were free to say no. But of course, it's your choice, or feel free to refuse, or even just, you're free to decide. Compliance nearly doubled compared to requests without that phrase. The words don't change the request itself. They change how it feels. We resist being cornered. We resist being forced. When people sense pressure, when they feel their autonomy threatened, their instinct is to pull back, to protect their freedom by refusing. It's called psychological reactance, the motivation to restore freedom when it feels restricted. But when freedom is acknowledged, when someone explicitly tells us we're free to say no, that reactance dissolves. The wall comes down. Saying, "You're free to decide," removes the feeling of obligation without removing the actual request. It acknowledges autonomy while still asking for compliance. And paradoxically, that acknowledgement makes compliance easier because it doesn't feel forced. When you're told you're free to refuse, refusing starts to feel like the hostile act, the antisocial choice. Agreeing feels generous, helpful, freely given, even though the outcome is exactly what the requester wanted. You've seen this at work in daily life, probably without recognizing the pattern. A friend says, "You should come to dinner, but it's totally up to you." Suddenly, you're leaning toward yes. The explicit freedom to choose removes the pressure, and without pressure, your genuine inclination or your desire to be helpful, to be a good friend, surfaces. A salesperson adds, "Of course, you're free to walk away any time." The pressure fades, but the desire to see what they're offering often grows. You stay, not because you have to, but because you want to, or at least that's how it feels. Even in written requests, adding phrases like, "but you're under no obligation," or "feel free to decline," increases positive responses. The freedom acknowledged makes the request feel lighter, less demanding, more like an invitation than an imposition. The technique works because control matters more than outcome to most people. We want to feel that decisions are ours, that we're acting from choice rather than coercion. When that feeling of control is preserved, or when it's explicitly granted, we're more willing to comply because the compliance doesn't threaten our sense of autonomy. We're not obeying, we're choosing. And that distinction, however illusory, makes all the difference. That's why this trick endures across cultures and contexts. By reminding someone they're free, you don't weaken your request, you strengthen it. You remove the resistance that pressure creates. You make compliance feel like generosity rather than surrender. Because the surest way to guide someone isn't by forcing their hand. It's by letting them believe the choice was always theirs, that their freedom was never in question, that they decided, freely, autonomously, to give you exactly what you wanted all along. And while acknowledging freedom increases compliance, there's another counterintuitive truth about influence. Sometimes the less you say, the more power you hold. Speak less than them. You'll win influence. In conversation, silence can feel like weakness. We rush to fill it, stacking words on words, believing that the more we say, the more persuasive we'll be, the more impressive we'll seem. But the opposite is often true. The person who speaks less usually ends up with more control, more influence, more power in the exchange. Psychologists studying persuasion have noted that people assign authority not to the one who talks the most, but to the one who listens. Speaking less creates space, and space pulls others in. It's like a vacuum in conversation. Nature abhors it, and people rush to fill it. When you let someone talk, really talk without interruption, they reveal more than they intended. They justify themselves, expose their reasoning, sometimes even argue themselves into positions that make your case stronger without you having to make it. You've seen this in negotiations, probably without recognizing the pattern. The quiet buyer who nods but says little often gets the better price, while the seller talks themselves into concessions. The seller explains, justifies, offers alternatives, sweetens the deal, all while the buyer sits back and listens. Each word the seller speaks is another card revealed, another piece of leverage surrendered. The silence on the other side isn't emptiness, it's strategy. In interviews, the dynamic flips in fascinating ways. Candidates who pause and let silence stretch sometimes make the panel work harder to sell them on the job. The interviewer, uncomfortable with the quiet, begins explaining benefits, emphasizing opportunities, essentially pitching the position because the candidate hasn't rushed to express desperate interest. The silence creates the impression of options, of someone who doesn't need this particular opportunity, which paradoxically makes them more attractive. Even in friendships and personal relationships, the pattern holds. The best listeners aren't the ones who speak often or offer constant advice. They're the ones who leave room for the other person's words to grow, to expand, to fill the conversation. And people walk away from those conversations feeling understood, feeling heard, even if the listener said very little. The space given was the gift, and that gift creates loyalty, affection, trust. It works because silence is magnetic in a world of noise. When you don't fill the space, others rush to fill it for you. And when they do, they often talk themselves into positions they hadn't planned, reveal information they meant to keep private, expose vulnerabilities they wanted to hide. They walk away thinking they had a great conversation, never realizing they did 90% of the talking, never noticing that you guided the entire exchange through strategic silence. There's another layer too. Speaking less makes what you do say carry more weight. If someone talks constantly, their words blur together, become background noise. But if someone is mostly quiet, when they finally speak, everyone pays attention. The rarity creates value. Each sentence lands heavier because it's not competing with a dozen other sentences. It stands alone, given room to breathe and be considered. Watch how this plays out in meetings. The person who speaks up constantly, who has an opinion on everything, gradually loses influence. People stop listening fully because they know more words are coming, always coming. But the person who mostly listens, who speaks only occasionally, but with purpose, when they talk, the room goes quiet. People lean in, because scarcity of words creates value, and value commands attention. Of course, there's a balance. Speak too little and you disappear, become irrelevant, get overlooked entirely. The technique isn't absolute silence, it's strategic restraint. It's choosing carefully when to speak and when to let silence work for you. It's understanding that every word you add is one more word that could be used against you, one more piece of information revealed, one more opportunity for the conversation to slip from your control. Influence doesn't always come from having the loudest voice in the room, from dominating the conversation, from making sure everyone hears your perspective. Sometimes it comes from having the quietest voice, the one that lets everyone else talk until they forget whose idea was whose, until the silence has extracted everything they meant to keep hidden, until the space you created has been filled with exactly the information, the commitments, the revelations you needed all along. And when you do speak, when you break that strategic silence, there's a way to plant expectations that become self-fulfilling prophecies, to shape behavior by describing it as though it already exists. Tell them they're good at it. They'll prove you right. There's a strange pull in being told you're good at something, even if you doubt it, even if you've never thought about it before. Part of you feels the urge to live up to those words. It's not just flattery, it's deeper than that. It's the creation of an identity, a role, a future self that you suddenly want to become real. Psychologists call this the Pygmalion effect, when expectations, even casual ones, shape performance. One classic study followed teachers who were told that certain students had unusual potential. In reality, those students were chosen at random. There was nothing special about them. But by the end of the year, they outperformed their peers significantly. Why? Because the teachers, believing they were gifted, gave them more attention, more patience, more encouragement. And the students, sensing those elevated expectations, rose to match them. The same effect happens everywhere, constantly, invisibly. Tell a child they're a great storyteller and watch them invent more elaborate tales, putting effort into narratives they might have abandoned. Tell a co-worker they're brilliant at problem-solving and see them step forward in the next challenge, volunteering ideas they might have kept quiet. Even strangers react this way. When you tell someone they seem confident, they often start acting that way, if only to stay consistent with your view of them. It works, because no one wants to create dissonance between who they are and who they're seen to be. When someone paints us in a flattering light, we bend ourselves, consciously or not, to fit that reflection. We don't want to disappoint the person who saw something good in us. We don't want to prove them wrong, and so we change our behaviour, sometimes dramatically, to match the description they provided. But here's where it moves from encouragement to manipulation. You don't just describe people, you shape them. By telling them they're good at something, you create pressure to demonstrate that skill. By saying they're the kind of person who does X, you make them more likely to do X, not because they were already inclined, but because you've constructed an identity they now want to inhabit. Sales managers do this constantly. You've got a natural talent for this. I can tell you're going to be great at closing deals. The words aren't predictions, they're instructions disguised as observations. The employee, hearing this, works harder to prove the manager right, to live up to the identity that was just handed to them. Parents do it too, sometimes helpfully, sometimes harmfully. Tell a child they're responsible, and they often become more responsible. Tell them they're careless, and carelessness becomes part of their identity. The labels stick, become self-fulfilling, shape years of behavior based on a few repeated words. In relationships, this pattern appears constantly. Tell your partner they're thoughtful, and they may become more thoughtful, not because they were before, but because you've given them a role to inhabit. Tell them they're selfish, and watch selfishness grow as they either embrace the label or stop fighting against it. The dark side is obvious once you see it. By framing someone as good at something, you're not just encouraging them, you're creating obligation. You're making them perform an identity you've assigned. And if that identity serves your purposes rather than theirs, you're essentially programming their behavior through strategic compliments. But the power is undeniable. When you tell people they're good at something, when you describe their future success as though it's already certain, they don't just feel good about themselves. They feel good about you for recognizing it. And once they prove your words true, Once they become the person you described, they attribute that growth to themselves while subconsciously crediting you for seeing it first. That's the hidden trick in this technique. It's not just that you shape behavior, it's that the person shaped feels grateful for the shaping, feels like you understood them better than they understood themselves. Your brothers and sisters, or the people you love, might just need a little nudge. Tell them they're capable. Tell them you see their potential. Tell them they're the kind of person who succeeds. And watch as they work tirelessly to prove you right, never quite realizing that the person they're becoming is the person you decided to create. Of course, individual influence is one thing, but there's also the power of the crowd, the invisible pressure that comes from knowing what others do. Mention what most people do. They'll follow. Human beings like to believe we make decisions independently, guided by reason and personal preference, charting our own course through the world. But beneath that belief lies something older, stronger, harder to resist: the pull of the crowd, the magnetic force of social proof. When we hear what most people are doing, our instincts push us to fall in line, often without realizing it's happening. Psychologists call this social proof, and it's one of the most reliable influence techniques ever studied. In one classic experiment, hotel guests were encouraged to reuse towels. Signs that simply said, "Help save the environment," had modest impact. Some people complied, many didn't. But when the sign said, "Most guests reuse their towels," compliance shot up dramatically. Nothing about the towels changed. Nothing about the environmental benefit changed. Only the sense that others were already doing it. You see this everywhere once you start looking. Online stores label items as best sellers, not just to indicate popularity, but to create it. If everyone else is buying this, maybe you should too. Restaurants brag about their most popular dishes, which then become even more popular as people gravitate toward the safe choice, the validated choice. Even in politics, phrases like "the majority agrees" or "most Americans believe" carry weight, nudging people toward conformity regardless of whether the majority claim is even true. It doesn't matter whether the crowd is real or imagined. What matters is the suggestion that everyone else is already on board. That suggestion taps into instincts that evolution carved into us over millions of years. In small tribes, survival depended on moving with the group. To stray was dangerous. You might miss important information, violate social norms, end up isolated and vulnerable. Our nervous system still echoes that logic, rewarding us with comfort when we align with the majority, punishing us with unease when we resist. That's why this trick works so easily, so reliably. By mentioning what most people do, you don't just share information, you tap into a survival code written deep in the brain. And once that code is triggered, resistance feels risky, agreement feels safe. Following the crowd feels like wisdom rather than conformity. Marketers weaponize this constantly. Over 1 million sold. Why does that matter? It doesn't speak to quality, doesn't guarantee satisfaction, doesn't mean the product is right for you specifically. But it means others chose it, and that alone makes it feel safer, more legitimate, more worth choosing yourself. The crowd has vetted it for you. In social situations, the effect is even more pronounced. everyone's going to be there is often enough to convince someone to attend an event they weren't interested in. Not because the event became more appealing, but because being absent means being outside the group, and being outside the group triggers ancient anxieties about exclusion and isolation. Even in matters of opinion and belief, social proof shapes us more than we'd like to admit. Most experts agree, often ends debates before they begin. Not because the expertise has been evaluated, but because the majority of experts creates a presumption of correctness. We trust the crowd of specialists even when we have no way to verify their credentials or reasoning. The danger, of course, is that majorities can be wrong. History is full of moments when what most people do led to catastrophe, when following the crowd meant participating in injustice or absurdity. But in the moment, in the immediate pressure of social proof, that historical perspective vanishes. All that matters is the sense that you're aligned with the group or dangerously isolated from it. So when you want to guide behavior, when you want to make a choice seem natural and obvious, don't just present it as the right choice. Present it as the popular choice. Tell people what most others are already doing. Frame your suggestion as the majority position. Because once the crowd is invoked, once that ancient code is activated, resistance feels lonely and risky. Agreement feels like coming home. And most people, given the choice between standing alone and joining the crowd, will join, even if they never consciously decided to follow. And while social proof guides people through invisible pressure, your physical presence can do the same through body language that speaks before you ever open your mouth. Use an open body. They'll feel safe. Long before words, there was posture. Our ancestors didn't need language to know whether someone was a friend or a threat. They looked at the way a body stood, shoulders tight, arms crossed, fists clenched meant danger, shoulders relaxed, arms open, palms visible meant safety. That instinct is still with us today, operating faster than conscious thought, reading bodies before we process words. Psychologists studying nonverbal communication have shown that open body language consistently makes others feel more comfortable, more trusting, more willing to engage. Uncrossed arms, palms visible, torso facing the person you're speaking to. These signals are processed in milliseconds, faster than any verbal message could travel. The brain reads them as signs of safety, honesty, approachability. They bypass our rational defenses and speak directly to the nervous system. Think about how different it feels to talk to someone whose arms are folded versus someone who gestures freely with open hands. One feels guarded, defensive, closed off, even if their words are friendly, even if they're smiling. The body tells a different story, and the body's story is the one we believe. The other feels present, engaged, welcoming. Even small shifts matter tremendously. Leaning slightly forward instead of back signals interest rather than withdrawal. Keeping hands visible instead of hidden in pockets or behind your back signals that you have nothing to conceal. These cues reassure the nervous system that no danger is near, lowering tension before a single sentence is spoken. It's pre-verbal communication, the kind that happens in the limbic system before the cortex has time to analyze or question. When someone's body says safe, your body responds with relaxation, with openness, with willingness to trust. You see it in leaders who open their stance to connect with a crowd. They don't hide behind podiums. They step out, arms wide, making themselves physically vulnerable in a gesture that paradoxically conveys strength. You see it in teachers who gesture broadly to make students feel included rather than lectured at. The expansive movements say, "This space is ours together," rather than, "I'm here and you're there." In friendships, people unconsciously read body language to decide how safe it is to be vulnerable. When someone uncrosses their arms mid-conversation, when they turn their body fully toward you rather than angling away, it signals that the space between you is safe for deeper truth. And often, that's exactly when people begin sharing things they'd been holding back, not because you asked, but because your body told them it was okay. The opposite is equally powerful. Crossed arms, turned away torso, hands hidden. These create barriers even when no barrier is intended. You might be cold, might be comfortable standing that way, might have no defensive intention at all. But the person across from you reads threat or discomfort or disinterest, and they respond accordingly. They hold back. They keep things surface level. They maintain emotional distance to match your physical closure. This is why job interviews, first dates, important meetings all benefit from conscious attention to body language. People aren't just listening to your words. They're reading your body for signs of whether you're safe, whether you're trustworthy, whether this interaction is one they should invest in. Open posture tells them yes. Closed posture, regardless of your words, tells them maybe not. But here's where it becomes manipulation rather than just communication. You can fake open body language. You can uncross your arms and show your palms even when you're hiding something, even when you're not trustworthy, even when the openness is theatre. And because the signals operate below conscious awareness, people will trust you before they've thought about whether that trust is deserved. The body speaks, and the body is believed, even when the body is lying. That's why open posture matters beyond genuine connection. It's a tool. When you need someone to lower their guard, when you need them to share information they'd normally protect, when you need trust before you've earned it, open your body. Face them fully. Keep your hands visible. Lean in slightly. Let your posture do the work that words can't, sending signals to their nervous system that override their rational caution. Because when people feel safe, they're far more likely to listen, to trust, to follow where you lead. And sometimes, making someone feel safe is as simple as showing them a body that says, "I'm open," even when everything else about you is closed. And when open body language lowers defenses, there's still one more verbal trick that makes even the flimsiest request feel reasonable, that shortcuts logic with the mere structure of a sentence. Give a reason to say yes, even a dumb one. We've touched on this before, but it's worth revisiting because the effect is so reliable, so universally applicable, so divorced from actual logic that it reveals something unsettling about how our minds work. In the 1970s, psychologist Ellen Langer ran that famous experiment at a library photocopier. "May I use the machine?" Worked 60% of the time. "May I use the machine because I'm in a rush?" Jumped to over 90%. And critically, "May I use the machine because I have to make copies?" A reason that explains nothing. That's circular and meaningless. Still achieved over 90% compliance. The brain didn't care about the logic. It didn't pause to process that everyone using a photocopier has to make copies, that the reason was no reason at all. It latched onto the trigger, the word because, followed by words that sounded like explanation. Because equals reason. Reason equals legitimacy. The presence of the structure mattered more than the content filling that structure. We like to think of ourselves as rational, as people who carefully weigh the merit of requests before deciding whether to comply. But this experiment, replicated countless times in various contexts, reveals that often we're running on autopilot. The word because taps into an ancient shortcut, a heuristic that served us well enough in evolutionary history. If there's a reason, it's probably valid. Asking for reasons takes time and energy. Most of the time, the presence of a reason is enough. We don't verify, we just accept and move on. You can hear this everywhere once you start listening for it. We need to do this because it's important. Why is it important? The sentence doesn't say, but the structure of the sentence, statement plus, because plus words feels complete. We can't do that because it's policy. What policy? Who made it? Why does it exist? The questions don't come because has already satisfied the requirement for explanation, even though nothing was actually explained. You should come because everyone else is going. Why does what everyone else does matter to what you should do? It doesn't. Not really. But the sentence structure, command plus, because plus statement feels like adequate justification. It won't work because that's just how it is. That's not an explanation. That's barely even a claim. But the because makes it sound like one. The explanations are empty. They're circular. They're sometimes absurdly meaningless. We do it this way because this is the way we do it. Yet they silence resistance more often than not. They make us nod and move on. The presence of something that sounds like a reason matters infinitely more than whether an actual reason exists. You can see this weaponized in corporate speak, where because precedes buzzwords that mean nothing. We need to pivot because of synergy optimization. What is synergy optimization? Nobody knows, but the sentence structure made it sound like an answer. In political rhetoric, we must act because freedom demands it. What does that mean? It doesn't matter. The because did its job, even in everyday manipulation, in small moments where someone wants compliance without earning it. Because is the magic word. Can you cover my shift because I really need you to? The reason is just the request restated, but it works. You should believe me because I'm telling you the truth. Circular, meaningless, yet somehow more persuasive than just, you should believe me. The trick is so simple, it feels like it shouldn't work. And yet it does, consistently, across cultures and contexts. Because, and here I'm doing it myself, our brains evolved to conserve energy. Evaluating every reason we hear would be exhausting. So we developed shortcuts. And one of those shortcuts is, if someone offers a because, they've probably thought about it, probably have legitimate justification, probably aren't just making things up. The presence of the word itself signals that reasoning occurred, even when it didn't. So if you want to slip past someone's defenses, if you want to make a request that might otherwise face resistance or scrutiny, add because, followed by almost anything. The reason doesn't have to be compelling. It doesn't even have to be logical. It just has to exist in the sentence structure where reasons go. Because gives weight to even the lightest request. And in a world where logic often takes a back seat to the feeling of logic, where the appearance of reasoning matters more than actual reasoning, the sound of the word because is often enough to open the door, to gain compliance, to make people say yes when they should be asking why. And finally, to close this section on subtle persuasion, there's a framing technique that makes ordinary information feel precious, that transforms the mundane into the magnetic simply by how you present it. Tell them you shouldn't tell them, then say it. There's a phrase that unlocks attention faster than almost anything else, that makes people lean in with an intensity that no amount of shouting could achieve. I probably shouldn't tell you this. The moment those words are spoken, the air shifts, everything else fades. Curiosity sharpens to a knife's edge. The listener leans in, eyes narrowing, full attention suddenly yours. Whatever follows feels charged, dangerous, irresistible, even if it's completely mundane. Psychologists who study persuasion call this the secrecy effect. Information framed as restricted or confidential feels more valuable than the same information given plainly. When something is not for everyone, it bypasses skepticism. It doesn't matter if the secret is small, trivial, barely worth mentioning. The framing alone makes it feel rare, intimate, important. The suggestion that this information is somehow forbidden or privileged elevates it beyond its actual content. You've seen this in gossip, where a story becomes exponentially more exciting when it's whispered behind a hand, when it comes with the preamble, "Don't tell anyone." But the information might be mundane. Someone changed jobs. Someone went on a date, but framed as secret, it becomes electric. The whisper transforms content into currency. You see it in marketing constantly. Insider tip, limited access. Only a few people know this. Behind-the-scenes information. The phrases don't add information, they add frame. And the frame does all the work. The human brain treats scarcity of information the same way it treats scarcity of goods. It craves it more. We're wired to seek what's hidden, to value what's not freely given. The trick works because people desperately want to be on the inside. When you tell someone you shouldn't be saying something, you invite them into a private circle. Even if the circle is imaginary, even if you're about to tell them something that hundreds of others already know. The framing creates the illusion of exclusivity, and that illusion is enough. They feel chosen. They feel trusted. They feel like they're getting access to something others don't have. And once they're inside that imaginary circle, they feel loyalty. They feel connection. They feel grateful for being included. Those feelings attach to you. You become the person who trusted them, the person who gave them access, the person who made them feel special. Even if the secret was meaningless, the act of sharing it, framed as secret, created a bond. But there's danger here too. Danger in how easily this technique can be abused. Because the more someone believes you've shared what wasn't meant to be shared, the more they'll value both the secret and the person who trusted them with it. You can create intense loyalty, deep trust, powerful connections, all built on information that wasn't actually secret, wasn't actually valuable, wasn't actually anything more than ordinary facts wrapped in the language of exclusivity. It's a reminder that sometimes the fastest way to make words matter isn't by proving their truth or demonstrating their importance. It's by making them forbidden, by suggesting that the very act of sharing them is transgressive, that you're breaking some rule or norm by letting them in on this information. The transgression creates value. The breaking of rules, even imaginary rules, makes the information feel powerful. So when you need someone's full attention, when you want information to stick, when you want to create the feeling of intimacy and trust without having to earn it through years of relationship building, frame what you're about to say as something you shouldn't say. Lower your voice. Glance around as though checking, "I'll tell you something, but just between us." And watch as ordinary information becomes extraordinary simply because you wrapped it in the language of secrecy. Because the things we whisper, the things we're told we shouldn't know, the things that come with warnings attached, those always echo louder than the things we shout. But secrecy is just the beginning. There are darker techniques, methods that don't just influence but manipulate, that don't just persuade but control. And one of the most effective ways to capture attention isn't through shouting. It's through strategic scarcity of something everyone craves. Frame it like a secret. They'll listen closer. Lower your voice. Lean in slightly. Let your eyes scan the room as though checking for unwanted ears. Then say, "I'll tell you something, but just between us." Suddenly, the world around you fades. The person across from you straightens, their attention sharpening, their curiosity transforming into something closer to hunger. It doesn't matter if the thing you're about to say is small, mundane, barely worth mentioning. The moment you frame it as a secret, it becomes bigger. Psychologists studying persuasion call this the exclusivity effect. Information that feels hidden or restricted is rated as more valuable than the same information given openly. It's not the content that matters, it's the frame. The suggestion that this isn't for everyone makes the brain cling to it harder, makes the listener feel chosen, special, trusted, and that feeling creates bonds faster than almost anything else. You've seen this in gossip, where a trivial story feels magnetic once it's whispered, once it comes with the implicit understanding that not everyone gets to know. The content might be meaningless. Someone bought a new car. Someone is thinking about changing jobs, but framed as confidential information, as something being shared in trust, it transforms. The whisper makes it matter. The secrecy gives it weight it doesn't inherently possess. You see it in marketing, everywhere. Members only, exclusive access, for your eyes only, insider information. More even in politics and journalism, leaks and behind-the-scenes details are devoured faster than official announcements. Not because they're more accurate or important, but because they feel like secrets, like information we're not supposed to have, like we're getting access to something hidden from the masses. This works because humans are wired to crave what's hidden. Secrets create intimacy in a way that public information never can. When someone frames information as private, we feel chosen, set apart from others, trusted with something valuable. That feeling of being an insider binds us to the speaker, whether or not the secret itself is actually important or even true. And here's the manipulation. The secret doesn't need to be real. You can frame completely ordinary information as confidential, as something you shouldn't be sharing, and people will treat it as precious. They'll remember it more vividly, repeat it more reliably, and feel more connected to you for having shared it, even though you just made the secrecy up, even though there was never any actual reason not to share it widely. The frame does all the work. Between you and me transforms mundane observation into trusted confidence. Don't tell anyone, but makes public information feel private. I shouldn't say this, but makes the ordinary feel transgressive. And transgression, the breaking of rules even when the rules are imaginary, creates a bond between the rule breakers. People don't remember everything you say. Most words evaporate, forgotten within hours. But they remember the things you made feel like secrets. They remember the information you wrapped in warnings and whispers. Because when something is framed as private, it doesn't just stick in their mind, it sticks to you. You become the person who trusted them, the person who gave them access, the person who made them feel like they're on the inside. So if you want someone to lean closer, to pay attention with an intensity that commands can never achieve, don't just give them information. Wrap it in secrecy. Frame it as something not everyone knows, something you're trusting them with specifically. Create the illusion or the reality of an inner circle and invite them in. Because the things we whisper always echo louder than the things we shout. And the people who make us feel like we're on the inside become the people we trust most, follow most closely, defend most fiercely, even when the inside was never real and the secret was never worth keeping. But there's an even subtler way to control attention and create desire, one that works through absence rather than presence, through distance rather than closeness. Act slightly distracted. They'll chase your attention. You've seen it before, felt it yourself. Someone speaks to you, but their gaze drifts past your shoulder for just a moment. They glance at their phone briefly. Their attention seems to waver, just slightly, just enough to notice. And instantly, something changes in you. You lean forward. Your voice unconsciously becomes more engaging. Without thinking, you try harder to pull them back, to recapture what feels like it's slipping away. The distraction makes you want their attention even more. It's one of the strangest dynamics in human interaction, and one of the most powerful tools of manipulation. Psychologists studying social dynamics call this the scarcity of attention. The less of it we feel we're getting, the more valuable it becomes. People don't chase what comes freely. They chase what feels just out of reach. This effect shows up everywhere, in every type of relationship. In dating, the person who seems a little less available, a little less constantly present, often becomes the one everyone wants. Not because they're more attractive or more interesting, but because their attention feels scarce, and scarcity creates value. The person who's always there, always responsive, always available, they fade into the background. But the one who sometimes doesn't respond immediately, who seems to have other things going on, who occasionally lets their attention drift, they become magnetic. In sales, something similar happens. The customer who gets undivided, desperate attention from a salesperson often feels uncomfortable, pressured, pushed. But the customer treated with slight casual indifference, as though the salesperson has other interested buyers, other deals closing, other places to be. That customer sometimes pushes harder to prove their interest, to win back attention they didn't realize they wanted until it wasn't fully given. Even children sense this instinctively. When a parent is fully present, giving complete attention, the child often wanders off, takes the attention for granted. But when a parent looks away, becomes absorbed in something else, suddenly the child clings tighter, demands attention, does whatever it takes to be seen again. The withdrawal of attention triggers something primal. It works because the human mind is wired to seek validation, to need acknowledgement, to want to matter to others. A wandering eye or a delayed response sparks doubt, and doubt pulls us forward. We want to close the gap, to win back what feels like it's slipping away. Are we not interesting enough? Not important enough? Not worthy of full attention? The questions arise unconsciously, and the unconscious drives us to answer them by trying harder. The trick isn't rudeness. It's not about being dismissive or genuinely disengaged. That just pushes people away entirely. It's about subtlety, about creating just enough uncertainty to make your attention feel valuable. Too much indifference and people walk away, deciding you're not worth the effort. But just enough distance, just enough distraction, and they lean in. Think about conversations where someone gave you partial attention, checking their phone briefly, glancing around the room occasionally, seeming engaged but not completely absorbed. If you felt anything toward that person, if the interaction mattered at all, you probably found yourself working harder to keep their attention. You told better stories, asked more questions, tried to be more interesting. Their partial distraction made you invest more effort in holding their focus. And that's the manipulation. By acting slightly distracted, you make others chase you. You make them work for something they would have given freely if you'd seemed desperate for it. Your attention becomes a prize to be won rather than a gift freely given. And people value prizes far more than gifts. So sometimes you don't capture people by giving them more attention, more time, more energy. You capture them by giving them just less than they expect, just less than they feel they deserve. Enough to keep them engaged, but not enough to make them feel secure. That gap, that slight distance between what they're getting and what they want, becomes a hook. They reach for it, they chase it, they try to close that gap. And in doing so, they become more invested in you than they ever would have if you'd given them everything from the start. And while strategic distance creates desire, there's a psychological principle that governs all relationships, romantic or otherwise, that determines whether connections thrive or deteriorate. The 5:1 ratio rule. Relationships don't collapse from a single argument, from one bad day, from a solitary mistake. They collapse from imbalance, from the slow accumulation of negative interactions that outweigh the positive ones. Psychologist John Gottman studied couples for decades, watching them interact, tracking their patterns, predicting with startling accuracy which marriages would survive and which would fail. And he discovered a striking pattern that changed how we understand relationship stability. Stable, happy relationships share at least 5 positive interactions for everyone. Negative, a smile, a touch, a kind word, an expression of appreciation, a moment of laughter, 5 of these to balance each criticism, each complaint, each sigh of frustration, each moment of tension. This is the 5:1 ratio rule. The math isn't exact for every relationship. The precise numbers shift depending on context and individuals. But the principle is clear and consistent. Negativity is heavier than positivity. One insult cuts deeper than one compliment can heal. One moment of contempt damages more than one moment of kindness can repair. Which means harmony isn't built on avoiding conflict entirely. That's impossible, unrealistic, and probably unhealthy. Harmony is built on stacking enough good moments to outweigh the inevitable bad ones. It's about understanding that you can't have a perfect relationship where nothing ever goes wrong. But you can have a resilient relationship where the good vastly outnumbers the bad. This isn't just about romantic relationships. The same principle applies to friendships, to parent-child dynamics, to workplace relationships between managers and employees. The ratio might shift slightly. Some research suggests workplace relationships need higher ratios. Perhaps 6.1 or even more, but the fundamental truth remains. Negative interactions carry more weight than positive ones, and maintaining healthy relationships requires actively building a surplus of positive moments. Manipulators know this intuitively, even if they've never heard of Gottman's research. They know they can poison a bond with a steady trickle of criticism, knowing each negative weighs more than the occasional positive. A relationship where good moments and bad moments are equal isn't balanced. It's already dying, because the bad outweighs the good in emotional impact. So a manipulator who delivers one criticism for every one compliment is actually delivering far more negative than positive, slowly eroding the foundation of trust and affection. But the same knowledge can be weaponized in reverse. A manipulator can flood someone with positive reinforcement, 5 compliments, 5 moments of affection, 5 expressions of appreciation, overwhelming their defenses, making them feel seen and valued and special, and then slip in a single sharp remark, one criticism, one moment of cruelty. The victim, surrounded by so much positive, dismisses the negative as an aberration, as a one-time thing, as something they probably deserved. The ratio protects the manipulator, makes the harm invisible against the backdrop of cultivated goodness. But you can use this rule to strengthen bonds genuinely, to build relationships that last. If you must criticize someone you care about, if you must deliver difficult feedback or have a hard conversation, balance it with gestures of warmth. Not as manipulation, but as maintenance. Make sure they know they're valued even when their behavior needs correction. Make sure the foundation of positive interactions is strong enough to support the weight of necessary negative ones. If you want loyalty from others, build it not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent positives. A smile each morning, a word of thanks when they help, acknowledgement when they do something well. Remember a detail from their life and ask about it later. These tiny moments accumulate, building a reservoir of goodwill that can survive the inevitable conflicts and disappointments. That's the secret hidden in the ratio. It's not about perfection. It's not about never being critical or never having conflict. It's about mathematics, about emotional accounting, about understanding that bad weighs more than good and adjusting your behavior accordingly. And once you understand how much heavier the bad is than the good, you'll never underestimate the power of a single smile or the damage of a single careless word. 5-1. That's the ratio that determines whether connections strengthen or decay. That's the number that separates thriving relationships from dying ones. But ratios and calculations are one thing. There's also the immediate impact of first impressions. Those critical seconds when someone decides who you are before you've had a chance to prove it. Bring something in your hand. First impressions are fragile, formed in seconds, almost impossible to fully change once they've settled. Research shows people decide how they feel about you within moments of meeting, processing dozens of signals faster than conscious thought. Your posture, your expression, your clothing, your energy. And one subtle trick can tilt those seconds in your favor. Walk in holding something. A book, a coffee, a notepad, a folder, anything at all. Psychologists studying first impressions have found that objects change perception immediately and powerfully. Someone carrying coffee looks approachable, human, like someone who takes time for small pleasures. Someone with a book looks intelligent, thoughtful, like someone with inner depth. Even a clipboard can lend authority, as if the person holding it must have a role, a purpose, a legitimate reason to be there. The object becomes part of your identity before you've spoken a word. It works because the brain loves shortcuts, especially in the overwhelming task of evaluating a new person. Instead of judging you fully in those first seconds, which would require too much processing power, the brain glances at the prop you're carrying and builds a story around it. The object becomes a clue, a piece of evidence, a shortcut to understanding who you are and whether you matter. You've seen this everywhere once you notice the pattern. Speakers walk on stage with papers in hand, notes they may never reference, but the papers signal preparation, seriousness, that what's about to be said has been thought through. Business people carry folders they never open, but the folder says, I have documents, I have information, I'm here on legitimate business. Celebrities step out with a signature drink or accessory that becomes part of their brand. The object becomes inseparable from their image. The trick is simple but powerful. Objects make you look less empty, less exposed, less like you're walking in with nothing. They anchor attention, give a context, shape impressions. In a room full of uncertainty, where no one knows who you are yet. That object in your hand tells a story before you say a word. And people, desperate for context in those first confusing moments, will believe the story your object tells. There's also something about holding something that changes your own behavior, your own confidence. Walking into a room empty-handed can make you feel naked, vulnerable, unsure what to do with your hands. But holding something, even something as simple as a coffee cup, gives you a focal point, grounds you, makes you look purposeful. You're not just walking in, you're walking in with something, which implies you came from somewhere and you're going somewhere. You're in motion, purposeful, part of the flow of important activity. And in those first crucial seconds, when people are forming impressions faster than rational thought, that purposeful quality matters immensely. You're not someone who wandered in hoping to be noticed. You're someone who belongs, someone with a role, someone who's here for a reason. The object in your hand, however trivial, proves it. That's why walking in with something matters more than it logically should. You're not just entering the room. You're entering with a prop that tells a story, and the story is always better than walking in with nothing. You're carrying evidence of a life beyond this moment, of activities and purposes and roles. You become instantly more interesting, more legitimate, more worthy of attention, simply because you held something while walking through a door. And once you're in the room, once first impressions are forming, there's a psychological phenomenon you can use to transform from nervous to commanding, from uncertain to authoritative, simply by understanding how perception works. Use the spotlight effect to own a room. You walk into a room and immediately feel every eye on you. Every stumble feels magnified. Every wrinkle in your shirt seems obvious. Every awkward glance feels like it's being judged by everyone present. A spotlight is shining on your flaws, or so it feels. This is the spotlight effect, the tendency to vastly overestimate how much other people notice us, how much attention they pay to our appearance, our behavior, our mistakes. Psychologists have tested this extensively, and the results are both humbling and liberating. In one study, participants rated how many people in a room would notice an embarrassing t-shirt they were forced to wear. They estimated that about half the room would notice. In reality, fewer than a quarter did. Most people are too focused on themselves, too worried about their own appearance and behavior, to scrutinize you the way you imagine they are. Their spotlight is on their own stage, not on yours. The truth is, most people aren't watching you nearly as closely as you fear. They don't see the stain on your shirt or notice the tremble in your voice the way you think they do. Their attention is scattered, divided, mostly focused inward on their own concerns and insecurities. The spotlight you feel is largely in your head, a creation of your own self-consciousness amplified by anxiety. But here's where it gets powerful, where understanding the spotlight effect becomes a tool rather than just comfort. Once you realize the spotlight is an illusion, you can flip it. Instead of shrinking from the imagined scrutiny, act as though the room really is watching, but watching someone confident, someone worth watching. Stand taller, move deliberately, speak with presence, as though your words deserve attention. And something remarkable happens. People actually start paying attention. Leaders, performers, and skilled communicators know this instinctively. They lean into the imagined spotlight rather than away from it. By acting as though they deserve attention, they create real attention. A pause feels intentional rather than awkward. A gesture feels commanding rather than nervous. Confidence becomes contagious, not because others were judging in the first place, but because you gave them something worth noticing. The spotlight effect reminds us of a strange truth. People notice less than we fear when we're being timid, but more than we expect when we're projecting strength. The gap between those two realities is where power lives. When you're shrinking, trying to be invisible, people's existing inattention makes you actually invisible. You fade into the background. But when you expand, when you take up space and claim attention as though it's yours by right, suddenly people look. Suddenly you matter. It's not about being loud or obnoxious. It's about carrying yourself as though you belong, as though you're supposed to be noticed, as though the spotlight you feel is real and you're comfortable in its glare. That comfort radiates. That certainty draws eyes. And before long, the imaginary spotlight becomes real because you acted as though it already was. So if you want to own a room, stop hiding from the spotlight you think is there. Step into it deliberately. Act as though everyone is watching, not to judge your flaws, but to see what you'll do next. Move like someone who deserves attention. Speak like someone with something worth hearing. Because once you act as though the spotlight is shining on you, it will be not because it was there all along, but because you finally gave people a reason to turn their attention your way. At first, it feels like perfection. Messages every morning, compliments flooding every conversation, gifts, promises, intensity that seems too good to be real. That's the front half. Love bombing. It's overwhelming by design, lowering defenses and creating dependency. But then, without warning, it stops. Messages slow. Praise fades. The attention that seemed endless is pulled away. That absence creates panic, and the mind scrambles to get the warmth back. This is intermittent reinforcement. Rewards delivered inconsistently create the strongest attachments. It's gambling addiction applied to relationships. The unpredictability keeps victims chasing what they once had, unable to see the manipulation underneath. Once someone experiences the high of being love-bombed, they'll endure the lows of withdrawal just for the chance to feel it again. Gaslighting reality distortion. It begins small, a forgotten word, a detail twisted. You misheard. You remembered wrong. You laugh it off, certain of yourself. But over time, the corrections pile up. The doubts settle in. Eventually, you don't trust your own memory anymore. The term comes from a 1944 film where a husband manipulates his wife by dimming the lamps, then denying anything changed. She questions her sanity even as her senses scream the truth. The same tactic appears everywhere. Abusive relationships, controlling families, manipulative workplaces. Gaslighting works because memory is fragile. Most of us will doubt ourselves before doubting someone we trust. When someone insists with confidence that events happen differently, the mind wavers. The damage goes deeper than confusion. Gaslighting erodes identity itself. If you can't trust your memories, you can't trust your judgment. And once that trust is broken, you're far easier to control. The manipulator doesn't just win arguments. They win the world you live in. Triangulation in relationships. You notice it when someone brings a third person into a conflict that should only involve two. Instead of speaking directly to you, they compare you, measure you, pitch you against someone else. This is triangulation, turning communication into competition. In families, it's a parent comparing siblings. In friendships. Sarah agrees with me. In romance, invoking an ex for leverage. Triangulation works because it strikes at our need for validation. Being compared makes us insecure, and insecurity drives us to prove ourselves. Instead of questioning the manipulator, we try harder to regain favor. The triangle locks us in, always chasing approval of the one holding the angles together. The danger is that triangulation feels invisible when you're inside it. You feel urgency, jealousy, competition, but not the strings being pulled. It turns people into rivals, forcing them to fight for a balance that was never theirs to control. Silent treatment as control. You send a message, no reply. You call, nothing. Hours pass, then days. This isn't forgetting. This is silence as strategy, used not to withdraw, but to control. Psychologists define it as emotional manipulation. By cutting off communication, the silent partner creates imbalance. The other person scrambles for resolution, replaying every word, searching for the mistake. The silence says, "You are beneath response until you fix what I won't name." It works because humans are wired for social connection. Rejection triggers the same pain centers as physical injury. Prolonged silence feels like punishment, and punishment pushes behavior. People bend, apologize, change, not because they understand, but because they want the silence to end. The danger lies in its invisibility. To outsiders, nothing seems to happen, but to the one inside, the weight is crushing. Intermittent reinforcement addiction. Imagine pulling a slot machine. Most spins lose, some win small, a few deliver jackpots. This is intermittent reinforcement. Rewards given inconsistently create the strongest attachment. Researchers discovered this with lab animals. Rats pressing a lever became more obsessed when rewards came at random intervals. Steady rewards created boredom. Uncertain rewards created compulsion. The same pattern drives gambling, gaming, and social media scrolling. But the darkest use isn't in casinos, it's in relationships. One day there's affection, the next withdrawal. The unpredictability keeps the target desperate, waiting for the next hit of approval. This cycle is intoxicating because the brain learns that every small reward means hope, and hope, especially rare hope, is addictive. Victims stay because of the good days, but it's the randomness that makes leaving so hard. Trauma bonding creation. It begins with intensity, affection, praise, promises. Then comes the opposite: criticism, withdrawal, cruelty. The cycle repeats. Kindness followed by pain, comfort followed by chaos. Over time, the victim doesn't pull away. They hold on tighter. Psychologists define trauma bonds as emotional attachments formed through cycles of abuse and intermittent reward. The very person who inflicts harm also becomes the one who relieves it. The brain, desperate for safety, sees the abuser as both source of pain and source of comfort. This appears in toxic relationships, manipulative families, cults, even workplaces. A partner lashes out, then apologizes with intense affection. The victim becomes trapped in hope of the next good moment, even as bad ones pile higher. The bond isn't held by logic or love, but by fear, reward, and desperate hope. Until that cycle breaks, the bond only tightens. Emotional blackmail patterns. It doesn't sound like a threat at first. It sounds like love or loyalty or disappointment. If you cared about me, you'd do this. After everything I've done for you, how could you say no? Psychologist Susan Forward broke it into 4 parts: the demand, resistance, pressure, threats, guilt trips, playing victim, then submission. The target gives in not from agreement, but exhaustion. It attacks core human needs, wanting to be loved, avoiding conflict, protecting bonds. Emotional blackmail exploits all 3. You find it where guilt becomes currency of control. Don't let the team down. The cruelty is that it doesn't need force. It convinces the target to imprison themselves, choosing guilt over freedom, when love, fear, and obligation are woven into the same knot. Most people pull tighter, not realizing they've tied the rope around their own neck. Guilt-tripping frameworks. Few tools of manipulation are as quiet and effective as guilt. After all I've done for you. You never think about how much I sacrifice. With a single phrase, the balance tilts. Psychologists describe guilt-tripping as controlling behavior by attaching moral debt to everyday choices. The manipulator frames themselves as victim and you as selfish. It doesn't matter if the request is unreasonable. Once guilt enters, resistance feels like cruelty. It works because humans are wired for fairness. When accused of selfishness, most overcorrect, giving in just to prove they're not the monster suggested. That's why guilt is such a powerful hook. It uses our own conscience against us. The manipulator doesn't need to repeat it often. One sharp guilt trip can keep someone doubting themselves for days, sinking deeper the more they try to prove they're good. Playing the victim while being the aggressor. It's a strange inversion. The person who hurt you becomes the one demanding sympathy. They twist the story so their cruelty looks like suffering, their attack like self-defense. Psychologists call this DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. The aggressor denies what they've done, attacks your credibility, then flips the roles. Suddenly, you're apologizing for hurting them, even as you sit with wounds they created. This tactic targets empathy. Most people don't want to see themselves as cruel. When accused of causing pain, even unfairly, we pause, doubt, soften. And in that pause, the manipulator escapes accountability. If the aggressor is the victim, then who's left to blame? The target. By claiming victimhood, aggressors don't just dodge responsibility, they weaponize compassion itself. Use humor first, logic later. Laughter opens doors that arguments can't. When people laugh, defenses drop, tension dissolves, attention sharpens. That's why some of the best persuaders start with humor before moving to reason. Psychologists call this affective priming. Positive emotions change how we process information. A joke warms the brain's reception. Once someone's smiling, they're more willing to listen, more open to agreeing. The body responds before the brain does. Skilled speakers don't launch into data immediately. They crack a joke, share a funny story. The audience relaxes, leans in, and only then do they weave in facts. Humor is the hook. Logic is the line. In sales, a light-hearted comment makes the pitch feel less like pressure. Even in negotiations, humor reframes tension. You don't win people over by starting with logic. You win them with laughter. Once they've laughed, the logic feels like their own conclusion. Manufactured jealousy tactics. Jealousy burns fast, cuts deep, clouds judgment. Manipulators know this, which is why some deliberately create jealousy, not by accident, but by design. Psychologists call it provoked jealousy. A partner mentions an ex too often, flirts casually in front of you, or praises someone else just enough to sting. The goal isn't admiration, it's control. By sparking jealousy, they shift your focus from their behavior to your own insecurity. It works because jealousy hijacks the brain. Feelings of jealousy activate neural circuits tied to threat detection and survival. It pushes people into hypervigilance, into proving themselves worthy, into fighting for scraps of attention they should already have. Instead of questioning the manipulator, the target starts competing for validation. This appears in workplaces too. Leaders pit employees against each other with comparisons, breeding rivalry instead of unity. Wherever it appears, energy shifts away from examining the manipulator and toward fighting for their validation. Manufactured jealousy doesn't just wound in the moment, it rewires behavior, convincing you to work harder, give more, demand less, all hoping to silence the insecurity someone else carefully planted. The Barnum effect. Vague statements seeming specific. You're the kind of person who values honesty, but sometimes you keep things to yourself. You hear that and nod. Of course, it feels true. But here's the secret. That sentence could fit almost anyone. It's not insight. It's a trick. Psychologists call it the Barnum effect. Vague, general statements that sound specific enough to feel personal. Named after showman P.T. Barnum, who said, "There's a sucker born every minute." Psychologists proved him right. In a famous study, people were given personality descriptions supposedly tailored to them. Everyone got the same generic text. Nearly everyone rated it as highly accurate. You see this everywhere. Fortune tellers use it. Horoscopes thrive on it. Online personality quizzes recycle the same broad lines. You're sometimes shy, but can also be outgoing. The trick works because we fill in the blanks. We want to believe we've been seen, so we take vague truths and shape them into something personal. That's the power of the Barnum effect. With the right phrasing, you can make people feel understood without knowing them at all. People don't need you to know everything about them. They just need you to sound like you do. And once they believe you understand them, they'll trust you, follow you, give you power over them, simply because you spoke in circles wide enough for anyone to stand inside, yet made each person feel like the circle was drawn around them alone. If tonight's reflections softened your thoughts or opened a quiet doorway in your heart, don't slip back into the noise just yet. Stay here with us. Like, comment, and subscribe. Not out of habit, but as a gentle vow to continue waking up, one night at a time. The next chapter is already calling. Deeper, softer, truer.